Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I snuck out around 11:45. My mom had gone to bed a little after 10, and my stepdad was passed out in the recliner with the TV still on. I waited until I was sure they weren't going to move again, then slipped out the back door. I didn't even have to be that careful. The floor in our place creaks like crazy, but once they're out, they're out. My plan was simple. Meet up with a few people from school at the usual spot, the old batting cages behind the gas station. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk down the back trails, so I didn't bother grabbing anything except my phone and a hoodie. It was a little chilly out, but clear, stars out, and no wind. I was in sneakers, jeans, nothing heavy. The trail cuts behind the water treatment plant, then runs alongside the creek for a while before hitting the fence by the ball fields. It's not lit or anything, but I've walked it a dozen times. I had my phone flashlight on, just pointed at my feet. I made it to the cages around midnight. There were 3 people already there, Jamie, Lex, and a guy named Chris, who I didn't know super well. Someone had a speaker playing music low. We sat around on the broken benches and passed a vape, just talking about nothing. Nobody was drinking or doing anything crazy, just hanging out, killing time. I remember checking my phone at 12:17. I know that because I thought it was funny how specific the time was when I checked. I wasn't in any rush to get home, but I figured I'd dip out by 1. That was kind of my unspoken curfew when I snuck out. If I got back by 1:15 or so, no one noticed. It's what happened on the way back that I can't explain. I said goodbye to the group a little before 12:40. Jamie said something like, "Text when you get in," and I nodded, but I never did. I remember heading back down the trail with my phone still out, light on low. No weird vibes, no one following me. Just quiet and dark like it always is. But somewhere along the trail, I stopped noticing where I was. It didn't feel like I blacked out or anything. I don't think I ever stopped walking. It just felt like I blinked, and I was suddenly aware I wasn't where I thought I should be. The trail looked wrong. Too narrow, maybe. The trees on either side seemed taller, closer together. I stopped walking and turned in a slow circle with my flashlight, trying to figure out how far I'd gone. My heart started racing a little, but I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks. I was probably just off by a few feet, took a wrong turn onto one of the side deer paths. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, really quiet. No bugs, no leaves rustling, nothing. Even the sound of the creek, which I should have been close to, was gone. It was like being in a soundproof room outside. I could hear my own breathing louder than usual. I looked at my phone again to check the time and realized the screen was black. Dead. I hadn't used it much, so it should have still had at least 60% left. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Tapped the screen, nothing. No vibration, no flicker, just dead. I was standing there in the middle of the trail holding this useless phone when I felt something shift. Not saw, not heard, just felt. Like the air around me had moved, but there was no wind, like a pressure change. My ears didn't pop, but it had that kind of vibe. Like when you drive through elevation fast. I turned off the flashlight and just stood there for a second, trying to listen. And that's when I saw a flash of light. Not bright, not sudden. It was soft and slow, like a camera flash that didn't quite go off all the way. It came from ahead of me, just barely through the trees, and then disappeared. It didn't light anything up, it just was there for a second, then gone. I waited a bit, didn't move. The air still felt weird, thick maybe. Not warm, not cold, just like I was standing in something, not just air. I started walking again, slowly, not totally sure I was going the right way. I don't know how long I walked after that. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. Time felt wrong. My legs started to hurt a little and my feet were squishing in my shoes. That's when I noticed they were wet. Soaking, actually. I stopped and crouched to touch my jeans. They were wet, halfway up my calves. I ran my hand along the cuff and my fingers came back cold. But the trail hadn't been wet. It hadn't rained. There weren't any puddles. I hadn't crossed the creek. I looked around again and started to feel real off. Not dizzy exactly, more like when you wake up too fast and your stomach drops for a second. I felt like I'd wandered too far into something I wasn't supposed to find. Not in a bad guy in the woods way. More like whatever was around didn't care I was there, but I wasn't meant to be part of it. Then I heard this noise. It wasn't loud. It sounded far off, like a rumble or a generator, but it had a rhythm to it. Not a machine rhythm either, more like breathing, slow, steady, and deep. It came from the same direction I'd seen the light earlier. I didn't go toward it. I don't think I could have made myself if I wanted to. I turned and just walked. Not fast, but steady. I didn't look behind me. I kept my eyes on the ground and just walked. Eventually, the trees started looking familiar again, more spaced out. I recognized a log I jumped over on the way in, and after another few minutes, I saw the water plant's fence. When I finally got to the edge of the neighborhood, the streetlights looked way too bright. I felt like I'd been underground or something. I cut through a couple backyards and made it home without seeing anyone. I didn't even take my shoes off. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock on my nightstand said 2:41 a.m. I stared at it for a while. I didn't believe it. There was no way I'd been gone that long. I left the cages around 12:40. The walk back should have taken 15 minutes, 20 max if I was dragging. I plugged in my phone, and it took forever to turn on. When it finally booted, it said the battery was completely drained. No messages, no calls. Nothing between 12:17 and 2:43. My shoes were still soaked. I took them off and dumped water into the trash can. Not a little damp, full-on puddles in the soles. The cuffs of my jeans had this dark grit on them, like sand or really fine gravel. I sniffed the inside of one shoe, and it didn't smell like creek water, just off, like old metal or something. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared. I didn't feel scared, not exactly. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me. Not followed. Watched. Like I'd wandered through something's space and it had paused, just long enough to notice. The next day, I walked the trail again during daylight. The creek was low and dry on both sides of the bridge. No mud, no water. The trail was fine, nothing unusual. I checked my route against a map. There weren't any forks or turns I could have missed. No side trails that loop around. It was like I walked home in a straight line, but took 2 hours to do it. We were camped out near the edge of a dry lake bed in Nevada, about 2 hours east of Tonopah. Me, my brother Shane, his friend Tyler, and my girlfriend Emma. None of us were hardcore outdoorsy or anything. We just wanted somewhere quiet to drink, eat, and stargaze without city lights. Shane had found this spot from some forum post. No service out there, no signs, barely a trail in. Just a wide open stretch of flat earth surrounded by low hills. We'd set up camp by early evening, built a fire, grilled some hot dogs. The usual. The air got cold fast once the sun went down, but the sky was unreal. No clouds, just that deep black that makes the stars look sharper than they ever do back home. We laid out a couple blankets near the fire and just watched the sky, pointing out whatever constellations we could remember. It was around 10:30 when Emma said something like, "Is Orion moving?" We all kind of laughed because she says stuff like that sometimes, but she sounded serious. I looked up and saw what she meant. The stars that made up Orion were not quite right. The belt looked stretched, not by much, just barely, but enough that it caught my attention. I figured maybe we were at a weird angle or it was some atmospheric distortion. But as we kept looking, the shape kept shifting. The stars weren't twinkling like the others. They were solid. Not bright, but consistent. And after about a minute, it was clear they were drifting. Slowly, but together, like they were all part of one thing. The spacing between them started to change. What looked like Orion's belt stretched out more, and one of the stars started moving out of alignment entirely, drifting up and to the right. None of us said anything for a while. I think we were all waiting for someone else to explain it. Tyler finally said, "Okay, that's not right," and stood up. We all did. I kept staring at it, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the eye. But the movement was deliberate, not random like meteors or satellites. These lights were staying in formation. changing patterns slowly but in sync. The rest of the sky looked normal. All the other constellations were where they should have been, just this one group of stars was moving. Emma got nervous and asked if it could be drones, but there was no sound. The air was dead still. No wind, no buzzing, no engine noise. And these things were way too high up. You could barely see them move unless you stared for a long time, but they were definitely moving. A drone that high wouldn't show up that clearly, and there's no way someone would fly them this far out in the middle of nowhere. We started counting the lights. At first, there were 6. Then another one appeared off to the side, like it had been dim and then lit up. They made a loose triangle, then rotated into a long arc. It reminded me of those diagrams of satellite formations, but the spacing was too perfect, too controlled. We turned off the lanterns and moved farther from the fire so our eyes could adjust better. The longer we watched, the more it felt like the lights were aware of each other, changing direction at the same time, adjusting speed to maintain distance. At one point, they all stopped moving completely, just hung there. That was maybe the weirdest part. When they stopped, everything else felt like it stopped too. No night sounds, no breeze, no nothing. Emma asked if anyone else's skin felt tight. I hadn't noticed until she said it, but yeah, like mild pressure in my ears or altitude sickness. Not bad, just off. We stood there for her to try. I don't know how long, maybe 10 minutes. Nobody said anything. The lights just stayed there, motionless, arranged in a flattened diamond pattern. I tried to record with my phone, but the camera picked up almost nothing. Just black. I snapped a few photos anyway. Same result. Then, real slowly, they started moving again. Not down, not up. Just drifting sideways, all together, keeping the same formation. They went behind a wispy cloud, then came out the other side. That's how I know they were really there. The cloud passed in front of them like they were above it. They moved east for maybe 2 minutes, then the lowest one in the formation dimmed out. Not blinked, just faded. Then another. Then the rest, one by one, until there was nothing left but regular stars. We stayed up another hour, but they didn't come back. The next morning, we tried to brush it off. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it was something weird. Tyler joked about satellites, and Shane threw out some Air Force test thing. Emma didn't talk much during breakfast. When we packed up, I walked back to the spot where we'd been standing during all of it. Just open ground, no marks, no noise, but something felt thinner, like the air was still drained a little. Hard to explain. On the drive back, I checked the photos. A few showed stars, blurry dots, nothing that looked like a pattern. I didn't delete them, but they didn't show anything useful. We've camped since then, other places, but not there again. Shane wanted to go back a few months later, and I made up an excuse. Emma said no right away. I think Tyler did go once, but didn't talk about it after, just said it was quiet. I don't think we were supposed to notice what we saw, or maybe it didn't matter either way. But I've looked up the sky a lot more since then, and I've never seen anything move like that. I woke up around 4:30 in the morning and instantly knew something was off. Not in a big, dramatic way, just a weird feeling, like my brain was already halfway awake before my eyes opened. The air felt too cool for how I remembered the night being, and there was this faint smell, kind of earthy. Not bad, just out of place, like wet grass and dry dirt. I sat up and immediately saw that the window across from the bed was wide open. I never sleep with it open. It's one of those older wooden frame types that sticks unless you really force it, and I keep it locked out of habit. The screen was pushed up too, like someone had lifted both. The rug under it was wet, just in a rectangular patch, maybe 2 feet wide. Not soaked, but definitely damp, enough that the color was darker. And in the middle of the wet spot, there was this spiral of little brown leaves. That part didn't make sense. The leaves were dry, curled at the edges, and they'd been laid out in this neat swirl that almost touched the baseboard. I didn't count them, but there were probably a few dozen. They weren't scattered either. They were arranged carefully, close together, not overlapping. The kind of thing you'd have to sit down and do on purpose. I stood up, walked over, and just stared at them for a while. My first thought was raccoons or something, but there was no dirt, no scratches, no sign of anything climbing through. And The window wasn't broken, it had just been opened. I checked it again to be sure, and yeah, the lock was unlatched. Cleanly. I definitely locked it before bed. I remember doing it because I'd had the window cracked earlier while I was cleaning, and I made a point of shutting it before turning off the lights. I touched one of the leaves with my toe. It didn't fall apart or crumble, just sort of skated across the rug like it hadn't absorbed any of the moisture. That bugged me. The carpet around it was damp, but the leaves were totally dry. I checked my phone, half expecting it to be dead, but it was fine. No missed calls, no texts. I went around the house and looked at the front door, the back door, every other window, all locked. No sign anyone had come in. Nothing stolen, nothing moved. Just that one window and the leaves. I didn't go back to sleep. I made coffee even though I didn't want it, and just sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light on, trying to figure out how it could have happened. I didn't have pets. I lived alone. I didn't sleepwalk. And the spiral, something about that shape felt intentional. Too neat. Too specific. Later that morning, once it was fully light, I went outside to check the grass under that window. There weren't any footprints. The dew was undisturbed, like no one had walked across it. I even tried stepping across myself to see what kind of prints it would leave, and mine were obvious. Flattened grass, water pushed aside. There was nothing like that around the base of the wall. I took a photo of the spiral before I cleaned it up. It didn't look as weird in the picture. Kind of small, easy to dismiss, but standing there in person, it felt wrong. I used a dustpan to scoop up the leaves and toss them outside, then blotted the carpet dry with towels. It took a while to stop noticing that smell. That night I double-checked everything, locked every door and window, pulled the curtains tight. I even stuck a broom handle in the track of the sliding door just to be extra sure. I told myself it had to be something explainable. I even looked up things like prank neighbors, raccoon behavior, weird insects. Nothing made sense. I managed to sleep okay the next night. No noises, no dreams. But when I woke up the next morning, there was a single leaf on the floor at the foot of the bed. Same kind, dry, brown, curled at the edges. Nothing else. Just that one. That shook me more than the spiral somehow. It felt personal. I didn't tell anyone about it. What was I going to say? I live in a quiet neighborhood, small town, low crime. I hadn't had visitors in weeks. I thought about setting up a camera, but part of me didn't want to. I was scared of what I might see. Instead, I started sleeping with the bedroom door shut and a chair pushed up against it. I kept my phone on the nightstand with the flashlight app open. I made myself stay up late reading, watching TV on my laptop, anything to avoid turning off the light too early. Nothing happened for a couple of days. Then I woke up around 3 a.m., not to a sound, but to a feeling, like being stared at. I rolled over and stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying not to look at the window. Eventually, I sat up. The curtains were closed. I always kept them closed now, but they were moving just a little, not like wind from a vent or breeze. This was slower, like they were being pushed from behind, then let go. I sat there watching, barely breathing. After a while, they went still. I didn't open them. I didn't even get out of bed. I pulled the blankets up to my chest and waited for the sky outside to get lighter. Around 6, I finally turned the light on. Checked the floor. Nothing there. Window locked. Curtains looked normal. That day, I drove out to a hardware store in the next town over and bought 2 window alarms, one for the bedroom and one for the guest room just in case. They were cheap, the kind with a little magnetic sensor that beeps if the seal breaks. I tested them and everything. That night, I slept better. Knowing they were there helped, even if it was just psychological. I kept the phone on and the flashlight ready, just in case. 2 more nights went by, no issues. I started to feel like maybe it had just been a weird one-time thing. Maybe I'd left the window cracked more than I thought. Maybe the spiral was a trick of the wind. I knew I didn't believe that, but it helped me get through the week. On the 3rd night after I installed the alarms, I woke up again around 4. This time, it was silent. Not in a peaceful way, more like the kind of silence you only notice because it's too quiet. No crickets, no fridge hum, nothing. I sat up and listened. Then the alarm chirped, just one soft beep, like the warning tone before a full trigger. It came from the bedroom window, but it didn't go off completely. Just that half-second blip, like something almost broke the seal and then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the little red light on the sensor. It wasn't blinking. It looked fine. The curtain moved again. Just once, like someone pressing a hand against it from the outside and letting it fall. I reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on. I sat there gripping it, waiting. Nothing else happened. I turned on the light when the sun came up. Checked the window. Locked. No marks. Alarm still in place. I looked down and saw a short line of leaves under the radiator. Not in a spiral this time, just a row. 5 of them, all pointing the same direction. I picked them up, one by one, and threw them out the back door. Then I turned off the alarm, shut the window, and nailed the damn thing shut. I haven't opened it since. It started with the trail cams. I put them up more to watch for wildlife than anything else. I live alone in a small cabin about 10 miles outside a town that's already pretty remote. Closest neighbor's about a mile away, and even that's through thick woods and steep terrain. I don't have a landline, no internet, just solar power and a backup generator if I need it. The cameras were the kind you can check on your phone if you've got signal. I didn't, obviously, so I'd pull the SD cards once a week and scroll through the footage on my laptop. Caught all kinds of stuff. Bears, deer, a cougar once. One of them pointed west toward a game trail that comes down from a ridge about a quarter mile behind the cabin. The others covered different angles around the clearing I'm in. Last October, I noticed something weird on the logs. One of the cameras, always the one aimed at that ridge, stopped recording for about 30 minutes one night. I figured the battery ran low. They're solar, but sometimes if it's cloudy for a few days in a row, one might cut out for a bit. It happened again the next month. Same camera, same time window, around 2:30 to 3 a.m. I checked the footage before and after the gap. Everything was normal. Just a fox nosing around, then nothing, then a raccoon walking by like nothing had happened. I thought maybe it was a glitch, so I swapped that camera out with a brand new one. Different brand, even. Put a full charge in the battery, cleared the memory card. Next month, same thing. Gap between 2:30 and 3, exactly 31 minutes this time. It started to get under my skin. I wasn't scared, just curious. I marked the date and set an alarm for myself the next month. Got up at 2:15, made coffee, sat on the porch in the dark with a blanket and a flashlight. I didn't hear anything unusual. The forest was dead quiet. A little too quiet, maybe. No wind, no bugs, not even the trees creaking. At 2:30 sharp, the little red light on the trail cam facing the ridge blinked once, then shut off. I stood up and walked over to it. The screen was dark. It hadn't powered down. It was still warm, just not recording anything. I walked a little ways toward the ridge, maybe 50 feet or so, and just stood there listening. Still nothing. No smell of animals, no sounds. It was like everything was holding its breath. I couldn't see much beyond the first line of trees, just shapes in the dark. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't feel watched, but something about it felt off. The hairs on my arms were up, and I couldn't explain why. I stayed out there until just past 3. At 3:01, the light on the trail cam came back on. Just like that. No noise, no click. It just blinked back to life. I checked the card later, and it had the same gap. Nothing recorded during that stretch. That's when I started to pay closer attention. It wasn't every night, just once a month. The exact day shifted slightly, but it always fell within a few days of the full moon. Same window every time. 2:30 to 3 a.m. Tried different batteries, different cameras, even placed one in a tree facing the same ridge from a higher angle. Same deal. All of them shut off at exactly 2:30 and came back on at 3:01. Never earlier, never later. The ones facing away from the ridge kept working. One night in December, I sat out there again, brought binoculars, even though it was pitch black and I couldn't see much. The moon was out, but thin behind some cloud cover. Around 2:28, the woods got quiet again. The wind died. Even my breath felt louder than normal. Then, at 2:30 on the dot, every camera facing that ridge went dead. I looked through the binoculars anyway, squinting into the dark, hoping maybe I'd catch something, a light, movement, anything. I didn't see anything right away, but then around 2:40, I thought I saw a flicker. Just a faint glow, way up near the tree line on the ridge. Not like a flashlight, more like something glowing through the trees. A steady, pale light, almost bluish. It wasn't bright, barely visible, even with the binoculars, and it didn't move. I watched it for a solid 5 minutes. Then it blinked out, just gone, like someone flicked a switch. A minute later, the wind started up again, and the forest came back to life. Crickets, branches, distant owl calls. The trail cams powered back on at 3:01 like clockwork. I hiked up to that ridge the next day. There's no trail, and the snow was knee-deep. It took me about an hour. I found the spot where I thought the light had been, more or less. Nothing there. Just trees, rocks, and snow. No footprints besides mine. No broken branches, no sign of animals. Nothing. I left a camera up there that night, one of the good ones with night vision and a long battery. Pointed it down toward the cabin. Same thing. Died at 2:30. Came back on at 3:01. When I checked the footage the next day, there was just a frozen frame before the gap. Me walking away after setting it up. Then a black screen, and then the recording picked up again with a snowflake falling right in front of the lens. That was it. It kept happening. January, February, March. Always one night a month, always the same window, always facing the ridge. I tried motion sensors, even audio recorders. They all cut out at the same time. Nothing worked during that half hour. I mentioned it once to the guy who delivers propane to my place. He's ex-military, older. He didn't laugh, but he got quiet. Asked me if I'd seen any lights. I said maybe once. He didn't say much else, just kind of nodded and changed the subject. In April, I stayed inside and tried listening from the cabin. I turned off all the lights and opened the windows. At 2:30, the power flickered. Not all the way out, just this weird dip like the voltage dropped. The fridge hummed lower for a second. Then everything was normal again. The next morning, I noticed the digital clock on the microwave was blinking. That only happens if the power cuts completely, but nothing else had reset. Not my laptop, not the solar controller, just the microwave. I checked the footage again, same blackout, same half-hour window. But this time when the camera came back on, there was a single frame, just one, that showed something in the sky. Not a shape exactly, more like a distortion. A faint, rounded blur in the upper right corner of the frame, almost like heat shimmer, but with a hard edge. I showed it to a friend in town, someone who's good with photo stuff. He said it looked like a lens flare, but there was no light source in the shot, just snow, trees, and sky. In May, I didn't go out at all. Just stayed inside, closed the curtains, tried to sleep through it. I woke up around 2:45 without meaning to. Just woke up. My mouth was dry, and I felt like I'd been holding my breath. The power was out completely this time. No lights, no hum from the fridge. Just silence. At 3:01, everything came back on. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying it's anything specific, but it happens the same way every month, and it's only that ridge. Only between 2:30 and 3. Only on one night. I still live here, haven't told many people, but the cameras are still up, they still go dark, and I still haven't found a reason why. We were elk hunting up in the Hartz Range, northeast Oregon. Just me, my brother Mark, and his friend Dylan. It was late October, the last weekend of the season, and we'd set up camp near a ridgeline where Mark swore he'd seen fresh sign earlier that week. It was cold, but clear. One of those nights where you can see every star, but your breath comes out in clouds and your clothes never feel quite dry. We'd hiked out around 4 in the morning, trying to get to a clearing before first light. The plan was to fan out from there once we glassed the area. It was quiet. Almost too quiet, honestly. No rustling, no owls, no wind, not even the usual distant yips from coyotes, just our boots on dead leaves. We didn't hear the sound until maybe an hour into the hike. It started faint, this steady clicking like two stones tapping together. Rhythmic, just a soft tick, 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 then a pause, then again. At first, I thought it might be something in my gear, like maybe the rifle sling buckle bouncing against my belt or something. But I stopped walking and I still heard it. So did the others. Dylan asked if it might be a porcupine. Mark said maybe it was a woodpecker, even though it sounded too slow for that. The odd part was that it seemed to be moving. Every time we paused, it would sound like it was off to the left. Then next time we stopped, it'd come from behind us or up ahead. We should have ignored it. I know that now, but it got under our skin. The more we heard it, the more we started trying to follow it like it was daring us. We weren't exactly chasing it. We stayed cautious, but we definitely adjusted our direction toward the sound. Mark even checked his GPS and said we were still heading northeast, more or less. After about 45 minutes of that, the clicking suddenly stopped. We were standing in a patch of trees on a slope and everything just went dead. No sound at all. That's when we realized how far we'd gone without seeing any fresh sign. No scat, no tracks, nothing. Just bare forest floor and those same skinny trees. None of us said anything right away. Then Dylan looked at me and asked, "Does this feel off to you?" It did. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't just the quiet. Something about the trees felt wrong. They all looked the same. Same spacing, same shape, like we were in a loop. Mark checked his GPS again, his brow furrowed, and then he muttered, "That's not right." According to his unit, we were less than 100 feet from our truck. We thought it was broken. He rebooted it and waited for the satellites to kick in. Still said the same thing, 97 feet from our truck. Dylan pulled out his phone to check his app, same result. We looked around, confused, then followed the direction it pointed. Sure enough, we crested a small ridge and came out onto the dirt road. And there was the truck, parked exactly where we left it. All our boot prints from earlier were there in the frost. We hadn't turned around. We were sure of that. We'd gone in a straight line, or so we thought, for over an hour, following the sound and checking bearings along the way. But somehow we'd looped right back. We stood there for a while, not talking much. None of us wanted to say what we were thinking. It didn't make sense. We weren't green. We'd all hunted that area before. We knew how to navigate. The forest wasn't dense enough to cause that kind of disorientation. Then the clicking started again. Louder this time. Closer. It came from deeper in the woods, across the road from where we'd just come out. Same rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Pause. Tick, tick, tick. Like someone tapping two smooth rocks together, slowly and deliberately. We didn't move. I looked at Mark. He was staring into the trees, not blinking. Dylan was gripping his rifle a little tighter. It kept going for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped again. We decided to get back in the truck and regroup. Maybe grab something to eat, figure out what the hell was going on. We piled in, and Mark turned the ignition. Nothing. No crank. Not even a click. Just dead silence. He tried again. Still nothing. Dylan said maybe the battery froze or shorted out. He popped the hood. Everything looked fine. Terminals were tight. No corrosion. The battery was barely a year old. While they were checking it, I stayed in the cab and looked at the GPS again. It showed our previous track, a jagged, winding line that didn't match what we remembered at all. It zigzagged, turned back on itself, doubled over sections. At one point it drew a full circle, like we'd literally walked in a loop. But none of us recalled doing that. We hadn't backtracked once. Mark got back in and said we'd let it sit a few minutes. Sometimes electronics glitch up in the cold. That's when I noticed something else. The woods were quiet again. Not just quiet, empty. I rolled the window down and listened. No wind, no birds, no creaking trees, just a heavy, almost pressurized silence. It felt thick, like the air itself didn't want to carry sound. I started getting that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like we were being watched. I tried not to say anything. I didn't want to freak anyone out. But then Dylan said, "Real quiet. Do you feel that?" He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't have to. Mark tried the ignition again. This time it turned over. Relief swept over me so fast I almost laughed. We didn't even wait for the engine to warm up. He threw it in reverse and got us out of there. We didn't talk much on the drive back to camp. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. We chalked it up to maybe fatigue or equipment failure. But the tension in that truck was thick. When we got back, we checked the GPS data again on a laptop. Same weird path. It didn't match the terrain either. It showed us crossing a small creek and a ravine that we never went near. We hadn't even seen water out there. And yet there it was on the map, plain as day. A path that made no sense. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that clicking in my head. I wasn't sure if it was my memory looping or if it was actually still happening, somewhere out in the trees. Next morning, we packed up and left early. We didn't even try to finish the hunt. Mark didn't argue, which surprised me. He's the type to push through anything. But I think we were all spooked in our own way. We never really talked about it again. Not in detail, just sort of let it fade. But sometimes if I'm in the woods alone, I'll catch myself stopping mid-hike, listening, straining to hear something. And every now and then, I swear I do. I wasn't planning on paying much attention to the trail camera photos that morning. The cabin's been in my family for years, tucked deep in the northern woods, a place where cell service dies and the only company you get is the wind and whatever's out there in the trees. I was mostly just looking forward to a weekend off from the city, some quiet, a chance to hunt, and maybe fix the roof a bit before winter really set in. I plugged the SD card into my laptop while still sitting at the small kitchen table, the cabin's one bulb buzzing overhead. The screen flickered to life and the photo viewer started cycling through images. Most were what I expected. Deer wandering by, squirrels in mid-hop, an owl at dusk, the usual. But then I saw the one that stopped me. It was from just after midnight, a black and white still frame. Grainy, the kind of image you get from motion-triggered infrared cameras. There's a tall pine in the center, and just barely visible behind it was this shape. It looked kind of human, but not really. The outline was off, too thin in some parts, almost stretched. The head was tilted slightly, and the eyes glowed bright white, catching the infrared light even though there was no flash. I swear it looked straight at the camera. I blinked a few times, zoomed in. The image was definitely real. No glitchy pixelation like some corrupted file. Just a figure, mostly hidden behind that tree. I pulled back and scanned the rest of the photos from that night. Nothing else unusual. I closed the laptop and stared out the window at the thick forest. No animals stirring, no lights, just black trees against a dark sky. The rest of the morning passed slow. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was some trick of shadows or a deer standing strangely. Maybe someone walking by the property late at night. But I know these woods. People don't just wander around here after dark, not without telling me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing twigs snap outside the cabin, slow and soft, like something was pacing. I convinced myself it was a raccoon or a fox. Still, I kept the shotgun close. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a faint tapping at the window. Not loud, more like a gentle knock with something hard and small. I froze. The cabin's window faces the woods, and there's no trail near enough to get that close without me hearing footsteps crunching leaves. I sat up, heart pounding, and waited. Nothing more. The next morning, I found no footprints outside, no sign of anything or anyone. But the unease stuck with me. Over the next couple days, I checked the camera's memory card more. No new strange photos, just normal wildlife. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every time I stepped outside, I'd scan the tree line and catch movement just out of clear sight. A shadow here, a flicker of something behind the trees. I never saw anything full on, just glimpses. One afternoon, I was walking the trail behind the cabin, about a quarter-mile in. I stopped near a fallen log and heard that same rhythmic tapping noise. It wasn't wood against wood, more like fingernails or maybe claws tapping slowly. I looked around, but the forest was empty. I turned back toward the cabin, moving faster now. The tapping stopped. When I got home, I saw fresh footprints in the mud near the back door. They weren't human, too long and narrow with an odd gap between the toes. I stepped closer, trying to find a pattern or something familiar, but there was nothing. That night, the tapping came again at the window. This time it was faster, more insistent, like it wanted my attention. I didn't look. I just lay there, eyes open, waiting for it to stop. Morning came, and I told myself I was losing it. But when I reviewed the latest photos from the camera, there it was again. The same distorted figure, standing just behind a tree, eyes glowing. No flash, no movement from the figure, just a steady, silent presence. I packed up that day and drove back home. I left the cabin and the woods behind, but I still feel eyes on me sometimes. Like whatever that was didn't stay there. Maybe it never left. I was working the night shift alone at the regional weather station outside of Missoula. This was back in October, can't remember the exact date, but I know it was a Thursday because the cleaning crew always comes Friday mornings, and the floors were still a mess from the last storm system we tracked. That part stuck with me. It was around 1:45 a.m. when I noticed it. I was halfway through a routine sweep. Nothing major going on that night, mostly clear skies, low wind, light cloud activity moving in from the west. The radar was quiet except for some ground clutter near the mountains and the usual smattering of false echoes. I'd seen thousands of clean sweeps like that over the years. Nothing about it was unusual. Then one blip showed up. Just one. It popped into view on the eastern edge of our coverage, maybe 80 miles out northeast of the Sapphire Mountains. It was bright, stronger than your average echo, and it wasn't behaving like precipitation or chaff. The return was too compact. No spread, no trailing artifacts. Just a tight, solid blip. I marked it. At first I figured it might be a small aircraft flying low, maybe some kind of emergency responder or a private pilot off course. But then it did something weird. It maintained altitude about 11,000 feet, but started changing direction mid-track. Not a gentle bank or gradual shift like you'd see from a plane. I mean, it pivoted. The return jumped about 15 degrees to the north in one sweep, then again 20 degrees to the west on the next. It wasn't consistent. It would hold a heading for a second or two, then veer off like it had changed its mind. I thought maybe it was a glitch. Happens sometimes when birds get caught in low-level beams or when a system needs recalibration, but it wasn't anywhere near where birds usually show up, and the radar had been running clean all night. I adjusted the gain, zoomed in, and switched from composite reflectivity to base velocity. I was expecting nothing, maybe noise, but there was a velocity signature. Faint, but there. It was moving fast, much faster than a bird or balloon or anything unpowered. I calculated its speed between two frames and came up with about 480 knots. Then, a few frames later, it jumped to nearly 900. I remember just sitting there, staring at the screen, thinking I must have screwed up the math. I redid it, same numbers. It wasn't dropping in elevation either. That struck me as odd. Most radar anomalies tend to dip or rise, heat plumes, birds, whatever. But this thing was holding level the whole time, even while changing course. I kept watching. It zigzagged a few more times, then hovered in place for a good 4 seconds. Not moving, just hanging there. Then it accelerated. Not gradually, instantly. It streaked westward at a speed I've never seen on this system. I lost it after 2 sweeps. Just gone. It didn't fade or trail off. It vanished cleanly off the edge of the display. That's not normal. Even fast aircraft leave a bit of a wake or diminishing return as they move out of range. This one was there one moment and not the next. I wrote down the time and coordinates and checked our flight tracking feed. Nothing in that sector. No commercial flights, no helicopters. Not even a drone advisory. I pulled up archived radar data from other nearby stations to see if they'd caught the same thing. One of them, Station 3, farther north, had a faint match, but they weren't high-res enough to track its full movement. I thought about calling someone, one of the guys who handles aviation alerts, but what would I say? Hey, a dot showed up and zipped around like a fly and then blinked out. It wasn't violating any airspace, and it didn't trigger any safety protocols. So I just kept quiet, saved the screen recording, wrote a quick internal report, and went back to monitoring the weather. But here's the thing that really got to me. At 2:17 a.m., the same blip reappeared, about 60 miles west of where I'd last seen it. Just for one sweep. It blinked on for a single frame, right near the Bitterroot Valley, and then disappeared again. No transition, no path, just blink, gone. I stared at the timestamp, checked the logs, nothing else triggered. It was like it just peeked back in, then left again. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I stood up, walked over to the window behind the desk. You can see the hills from there. At night, just silhouettes. Nothing in the sky, no lights, no movement, dead quiet. I went back to my desk and checked the radar settings again. Everything was normal. No calibration issues, no signal interference. I ran a diagnostic. Clean. I even rebooted the system just in case, though I didn't really expect that to do anything. I didn't see the blip again after that. I watched for another 2 hours. It never came back. The next morning, When the day crew came in, I debated telling the guy who was relieving me. I opened my mouth a few times, but I couldn't figure out how to bring it up without sounding crazy, so I just handed over the shift notes like usual and left. On the drive home, I kept checking the sky through my windshield. I don't know what I thought I'd see. It was just habit, I guess. I pulled into my driveway at 7:12 a.m., same as always. Sat in the car for a while, thinking about that 1 second, the moment the blip froze on the screen before shooting west. I can't explain why that part stuck with me more than the speed or the angles or anything else, just that brief pause, like it knew it was being watched. I was skiing alone that day, which I know isn't smart, but I'd done that stretch of backcountry dozens of times and knew it pretty well. It was late February, right after a storm had dumped fresh powder over the Cascades. I'd parked off the main highway and hiked in about a mile before switching to skins. The plan was to do a slow loop around a ridge I liked and be back to the car by mid-afternoon. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Dumb, I know. The snow was perfect. Dry, light, untouched. No other tracks except the ones I was making. The sky was overcast but not threatening, flat gray, with no wind and just enough light coming through to keep visibility decent. The silence out there is always intense, but that day it felt extra heavy. No birds, no planes overhead, just the sound of my skis moving through the snow and my breathing. I followed a line along a gentle slope, taking my time. Around noon, I cut through a narrow stand of fir trees and came out into this wide, open basin, maybe the size of a couple football fields. It was surrounded on three sides by thick trees and had a shallow dip in the middle, like a natural bowl. I'd been there once or twice before, but never dropped into it because the snow tended to slide after storms. What caught my eye immediately was how smooth the bowl looked. I mean, perfectly smooth. No wind scour, no crust, just an unbroken white surface, like someone had ironed the whole thing flat. I stood there for a minute, just looking. I couldn't figure out what felt wrong until I realized there were no animal tracks. None. Not a rabbit, not a squirrel. Nothing had touched it. That's when I saw the indentation. It was off-center in the bowl, maybe 30 yards from where I was standing. At first, I thought it was a drift or a sink, but the edges were too defined. I skied closer, slowly, checking the snow stability as I went. When I got near it, I stopped. The size of it didn't register right away because it was so uniform, but it had to be at least 30 feet across, perfectly circular, maybe a foot or two deep in the center, tapering evenly all the way around. I skied up to the edge and looked down into it. It didn't look made exactly. There were no ridges, no pressure marks, no cracks in the snow, just this shallow, perfect depression, like something very heavy had settled there without actually hitting the snow. No scorch marks, no debris, and no tracks leading in or out. I checked, circled it twice, nothing. I didn't step into it, I don't know why, but I didn't want to. I just stood there, staring into the middle. I wasn't scared yet, just confused. The longer I looked at it, the more it bothered me. It didn't belong there. I pulled my phone out to take a photo, but the camera wouldn't load. The phone didn't freeze, it just acted like it didn't have the app installed. I tried opening it twice, then gave up. I checked my signal, nothing, which was normal out there. That's when I noticed the sound, or rather, the lack of it. Total silence, not even the soft whoosh of wind through the trees. I held my breath and listened. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring a little. I looked around. Everything looked normal. Gray sky, white snow, dark trees, but it felt wrong, like the air was too still. I took a few steps back from the edge and turned to leave. Right then I got this weird sensation, like a thud, but not sound. More like I felt it in my body. A pressure change, maybe. My ears popped slightly. It only lasted a second. I spun around, expecting to see an avalanche coming down or something falling from the trees, but there was nothing. The bowl looked exactly the same. The indentation hadn't changed. I stood there waiting. Nothing moved, no noise. I glanced up at the sky. Still flat gray, but I had the strangest feeling that something was above me. Not like a plane. Closer. I don't even know what made me think that. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. My shoulders tensed up without me realizing. I ducked my head like something might hit me. I don't know how long I stood there. probably only a minute, but it felt longer. Then just as suddenly I could hear again. The wind picked up, soft at first, then stronger. A couple birds called out from the trees. It was like someone hit unpause on the forest. I turned and skied out of there fast. Didn't stop until I was halfway back to the car. I didn't look behind me. The whole time I felt like I was being watched. Not chased, just watched. That prickling feeling on the back of your neck when someone's staring at you, even if you can't see them. I kept catching myself looking up, but the sky stayed the same. Overcast, flat, dull. When I made it back to the car, I loaded my gear and checked my phone again. Camera opened fine. Signal was still dead, but that was normal. I drove back down to the highway and didn't stop until I hit the first town with gas and cell service. That night, when I looked in the mirror, I noticed a weird red mark on my collarbone. It looked like a bruise, but didn't hurt. A faint circular outline about the size of a quarter. Could have been from my backpack strap, I guess, but I don't remember anything rubbing there. The next weekend, I went back, with a buddy this time. Same trail, same route. We got to the same ridge, cut through the trees into the basin, and the indentation was gone. Not filled in. Gone. The snow was still smooth in the bowl, but it looked like regular wind-swept terrain again. Animal tracks everywhere. Nothing out of the ordinary. My friend didn't think anything of it. I didn't mention the weird feeling or the sound, just said I'd seen something strange last time and wanted to check it out. I pretended it was probably a collapsed snowdrift or something. We did the full loop and left without anything weird happening. I still ski that area sometimes, but I avoid that basin now. I don't like going near it. Something about it just stuck with me. Not in a dramatic way. It's not like I dream about it or obsess over it, but every now and then, usually when I'm out alone, I'll remember how the snow looked, how perfect it was, how quiet, like something came down, touched the earth, and left without leaving anything but a dent. It was a night flight from Denver to Seattle. Nothing special about it. I fly that route a few times a year to visit my sister, and I almost always book the window seat because I like to lean against the side and sleep. I don't usually look outside much, especially at night. There's not much to see, but for some reason I was wide awake that time. Just wired. Maybe too much coffee in the terminal. We were cruising at altitude. I remember the captain had just said something about being ahead of schedule. The seatbelt sign was off. The woman next to me was asleep with a hoodie pulled over her face, and the aisle was dark. Most people had their shades down, or were watching movies. I didn't have anything playing. I just sort of sat there staring out at the blackness. I was on the left side of the plane. That detail sticks with me because I always try to sit on the right for some reason. And I'd ended up switching at the gate to be closer to the front. It's weird what you remember. Anyway, the sky was clear at first. I could see stars above us and the faint glow of cities way below, like scattered orange dots. It was quiet, just the soft hum of the engines and the occasional ding from someone calling a flight attendant. I don't know how long I'd been looking outside before I noticed the lights. They were red, not blinking like a plane's anti-collision lights, and not in any pattern I recognized. Just a soft, steady red glow, 3 of them, in a straight horizontal line. At first, I thought they were reflections from inside the cabin, so I leaned forward, pressed my face closer to the glass, cupped my hands around the window. Still there. They were outside for sure. Maybe a quarter mile away, maybe more. Hard to judge distance in the dark, but they weren't far, and they were moving, pacing us, perfectly matched to the plane's speed. I thought maybe it was another aircraft holding position, but I've never seen anything fly that close, that steady, and without strobe lights. No tail light, no green nav light. Just those 3 red points in a row, hanging in the air like they were painted there. I looked around the cabin to see if anyone else was noticing, but everyone nearby was either asleep or glued to a screen. I wanted to say something to the person next to me, but I didn't. I just kept watching. Then something changed. The middle light pulled slightly ahead, not by much, just a little, then stopped. A few seconds later, the outer 2 shifted diagonally outward at the same time, like wings spreading, and now there were 3 lights in a triangle. Still not blinking, still just glowing red. and they were still pacing us. No noise, no flash, no trail, just there. I leaned in harder. My heart was starting to race, but I didn't feel afraid yet, just focused. I kept thinking maybe it was a drone or military formation or something I didn't know about, but nothing about it looked mechanical. The way they moved, it was too smooth, like they weren't flying so much as sliding through the air. I glanced down at my phone to check the time, 11:48 p.m. When I looked back up, the lights had shifted again. The triangle was now vertical, one light high, one low, one in the middle, and then without any warning, they tilted inward toward each other, closing the gap in perfect sync. That's when they disappeared. They didn't fade or zip off, they just dropped into the cloud layer below us and vanished. All three at once, like they'd been pulled down. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the spot where they'd been, waiting for them to come back up. Nothing. I kept looking. 5 minutes. 10. Just clouds. Occasionally a patch would open up and I'd see darkness below, but there was no sign of the lights. I finally reached over and tapped the woman next to me. She stirred, pulled her hood back, and looked at me with that annoyed, half-awake face people get when you wake them up on a plane. "Did you see those red lights?" I asked. She blinked at me. "What?" "There were these lights, outside, just now, right off the wing." She leaned over a little to look, but we were over clouds again. "I don't see anything." "They were pacing us," I said, quieter now. Like, following us, and then they dropped into the clouds. She gave a little shrug. "Probably another plane or tower lights." At 37,000 feet, I didn't say anything else, just sat back and stared out the window the rest of the flight. I didn't sleep, didn't even blink much. My eyes felt dry by the time we landed. When we touched down in Seattle, I checked the flight tracking app. There was no other aircraft within 100 miles of us at that time. Not at our altitude, anyway. I looked up what kinds of planes have 3 steady red lights in a triangle. Couldn't find anything that matched. I even emailed the airline once, just to ask if they ever get reports of red lights during that route. They never responded. I don't know what I saw. I just know I wasn't asleep, I wasn't drunk, and I wasn't imagining it. The lights were real. They were outside, and they were following us for at least 10 minutes before they slipped into the clouds like they were never there. It happened last fall, mid-October, when the weather had cooled off just enough to keep the trails empty. I hike pretty often, just local stuff around southern Oregon, mostly for the exercise, but also because I like being somewhere quiet where I can let the dog off leash. Her name's Tula, a medium-sized mutt, part shepherd maybe. Smart, good recall, doesn't chase wildlife. We've done that trail a dozen times before. She knows the way better than I do. This was in the Umpqua National Forest, a few miles past the usual campground entrances, off a dirt road that gets rutted and muddy this time of year. I parked at a little turnout around 10 a.m., and we set off up a ridge trail that loops for maybe 6 miles and comes back down through a cedar grove. It's not a maintained trail, more of a footpath through the brush, but it's well-worn enough to follow. We were about an hour in when it started getting strange. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not just the usual forest quiet, but total silence. No wind, no birds, not even the faint buzz of insects. I only realized how silent it was because I could hear my own breathing so clearly. That kind of quiet just doesn't happen out there. I stopped walking and looked around. Tula had stopped too, a few feet ahead of me. She wasn't sniffing the ground or exploring like usual. She was standing perfectly still, ears up, staring toward the tree canopy. Not a sound from her, not even her usual panting. Then she let out this low, shaky whine, almost like a whimper, and sat down right there in the middle of the path. I walked up next to her and tried to get her moving again, but she wouldn't budge. She just kept staring up, not straight up, but slightly to the left, like she was tracking something. I looked where she was looking, but there was nothing. Just trees and sky. No movement. No sound. I listened hard, thought maybe I'd hear a drone or a plane or something, but it was dead quiet, like someone had hit mute on the whole forest. I crouched next to her and scratched behind her ears. She was shaking a little, still staring up. That's when I realized she wasn't blinking. I waved my hand in front of her eyes, and she finally snapped out of it. turned her head slightly, but didn't stand. I tried tugging her collar gently, coaxing her forward, but she just pulled back and let out another soft whine. I've never seen her act like that, not even when she was a puppy and got spooked by fireworks. At one point, I stepped about 20 feet ahead to see if she'd follow. She stayed put, just sat there, staring up at the same patch of sky. So I walked back, sat with her for a while. That's when I started to feel it too. Not fear exactly, but this pressure. Like something just over the tree line was watching us. I know how that sounds, but I don't know how else to describe it. The feeling you get when someone's behind you in a dark room, even if you can't hear them. It was that. The air felt thick. I don't know if it was the humidity or elevation or what, but I remember my ears popping a little like they do on a plane, and it got cold. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than it had been a few minutes earlier. I could see my breath just barely. Then, just as suddenly as it started, Tula stood up. She shook herself off and walked over to me, tail low, still acting nervous but moving again. She didn't look back up. I figured maybe there was a cougar nearby and we were just catching its scent or something, so I decided to cut the loop short and take a side trail back toward the car. I didn't feel good about staying out there any longer. We'd gone maybe half a mile down that side path when I noticed something else weird. The shadows. They weren't right. The sun was behind us, low in the sky but still bright, but the shadows from the trees were stretched, like longer than they should have been. I checked my watch. It was just after noon. No way the light angle should have looked like that. Tula kept looking behind us, not stopping, just glancing back every few steps. At one point she stopped and growled. A low, steady growl, not loud, but deep. I turned around expecting to see someone coming up the trail behind us, but there was no one there. Nothing moving, just the trees and those weird long shadows. I picked up a stick just in case, and we kept moving. I tried to calm her down, talking to her like normal, but she wouldn't make eye contact, just kept glancing behind us. When we got closer to the trailhead, I started to feel better. The sounds started coming back. Birds, wind in the branches, normal stuff. Tula relaxed a little. I clipped her leash on before we reached the car. That's when I noticed the time on my phone. It said 3:47 p.m. I know for a fact we weren't out there. We weren't out there that long. We started hiking just after 10. I cut the loop short. Should have taken 2.5 hours tops. But somehow we were missing almost 2 extra hours. I hadn't stopped long enough for that. I hadn't eaten anything, hadn't even taken a break besides sitting with Tula for maybe 10 minutes. It didn't make sense. There were no notifications on my phone either. No service, which isn't unusual out there, but still. The battery hadn't dropped much either, just the time. Wrong by hours. Back at the car, I checked the dash clock. Same time, 3:47. I didn't know what to think. I sat there for a while before starting the engine. Tula climbed in the back and curled up tight like she just wanted to sleep. The drive back was uneventful. No traffic. Just the usual winding roads and logging trucks. But I kept checking the rearview mirror every couple of minutes. I don't know why. That night, Tula wouldn't leave my side. She followed me from room to room, which she's never done. Even slept on the floor next to my bed instead of in the living room. I woke up a few times, thinking I heard something outside. Just faint noises like a low hum or static, but nothing I could pinpoint. The next day, I checked the GPS data from the hiking app I usually use. It had recorded the path, but there was a weird gap in the middle, like it lost signal or something. A straight line cut between 2 points, skipping maybe 1.5 miles. No elevation data, no pace recorded during that part. Just blank. I haven't gone back to that trail since. Neither has Tula. Every time we drive past that road, she gets antsy and whines. I don't know what happened out there, but something was off. Way off. I was on a flight from Portland to Denver last October. It was one of those midday trips, 1:30 p.m. departure, and the plane was maybe 2/3 full. I had an aisle seat, 22C. Nothing special. I wasn't really paying attention to much, just had headphones in, half watching a movie. Everything felt normal for the first hour or so. Somewhere over the Rockies, maybe a bit before the descent started, the plane dipped. Not hard, not enough to throw drinks or anything, but enough that everyone kind of looked around at each other. It wasn't turbulence, it felt more like a smooth but deliberate shift downward, like the nose lowered slightly, then leveled again. That alone wouldn't have stuck with me. Planes move around a lot more than most people realize, but it was the way the flight attendants reacted that made it weird. I noticed the one closest to us, tall guy, maybe mid-30s, stop in the aisle and glance toward the cockpit. Not panicked or anything, but alert. He waited there for maybe 10 seconds, then ducked into the front galley, and I didn't see him again for a while. A few people murmured about it, but nobody freaked out. We leveled off again quickly. Maybe 5 minutes later, the captain came on. His voice sounded normal, but the message was off. He said something like, "Folks, just a quick update from the flight deck. We made a minor course correction a few minutes ago. Nothing to worry about, and we're just a precaution. We'll begin our descent into Denver shortly." There was a weird pause before he said precaution. Just half a second too long, like he was searching for the right word. The woman next to me looked up from her book and raised her eyebrows at me, and I kind of shrugged. It didn't make sense, but what were we going to do? We landed about 15 minutes late. When we taxied to the gate, they kept us seated for a bit longer than usual. No explanation, just a delay with the jet bridge, supposedly. During that wait, 2 airport staff came on board and went straight into the cockpit. That's when things really started feeling strange. They were wearing standard uniforms, nothing dramatic, but they didn't say anything to the passengers or crew. Just in and out. After they left, we deplaned like normal. I didn't think I'd hear anything else about it, but a couple weeks later, a buddy of mine who works in aviation maintenance told me something odd. I'd casually mentioned the flight and the mid-air dip, and he got really quiet. Then he said, "You were on that one?" Apparently, word had gotten around in their group chats. He said 3 different crew members on that flight, including both pilots, had filed informal reports afterward. They weren't public, just internal logs. But what they described was a metallic object that crossed in front of the plane at high speed, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 feet above sea level. No transponder signal, no radar signature. Just visual. They said it came in from the left side, about a quarter mile ahead, maybe slightly above their altitude. The pilot adjusted course by a few degrees to avoid it. It never showed up on any of their instruments. But all 3 people in the cockpit saw it. No one called it a drone or a balloon. My buddy said that specifically. It wasn't shaped like anything familiar. One of them described it as a reflective disc or oval rotating slightly as it moved. No contrail, no noise. What's even weirder is that the report was closed with no action. No follow-up from ATC, no further questions. Just filed and done. That happens more than people think, apparently. After he told me all that, I started checking forums and sites where pilots post anonymously. I found 2 other people claiming to be on that same flight. One said they saw something flash past the window on the left side, too fast to make out, but it caught the sun just right. Another said the captain looked visibly shaken when exiting the cockpit after landing. I never saw anything myself, just that dip in altitude and the awkward announcement. But thinking back on it, there were other little things. The lights in the cabin flickered once, briefly, during the dip. I'd forgotten that until later. And I remembered hearing a weird clicking sound, like static, through my headphones. I thought it was just the movie buffering or interference, but it happened right as the plane leveled again. I didn't report anything, didn't talk to the airline, didn't mention it to anyone besides that one friend. It wasn't enough to do anything with, but I think about it more than I expected to, just because of how it played out, how quiet it all was, how none of it made the news, like it wasn't supposed to. It happened about a year ago. I was driving back from my cousin's place in northern Arizona, taking the back highways through the desert because I wanted to avoid traffic around Flagstaff. It was a Sunday night around 11:30, and I had work the next morning, so I was trying to make good time. That stretch of road, Highway 160, is basically empty at night. No streetlights, no gas stations for miles. just wide open, nothing. I didn't see another car for almost an hour. I wasn't tired exactly, but I'd hit that weird zone you get into when you've been driving too long. The road in front of you stops feeling like it's moving. Just dark asphalt, white lines, then more of the same. I had music on low, a podcast queued up next, just trying to stay alert. I remember passing a road sign for Tuba City, something like 38 miles to go, and then nothing for a while. Just open desert. The moon was full or close to it because everything had that gray glow. You could see the outlines of the mesas and low shrubs stretching out forever. I came over a slight rise and saw something standing on the shoulder, just off the right side of the road. I slowed down, not because I was scared or anything, but because I thought it might be someone broken down or walking. There's no shoulder lights out there, and sometimes people do stupid stuff, like hitchhike in the middle of nowhere. But the thing was, it wasn't moving, not even a little, just standing there, facing the road. At first I thought it was a guy, average height, kind of thin, no obvious features, just this upright shape, no flashlight, no bags, not even clothes I could clearly make out. Just dark, almost like a silhouette. I drove past it doing maybe 45 or 50, staring the whole time. I expected it to look at me or take a step or something, but it didn't. It just stood there, perfectly still. I passed it and checked my rearview mirror, but it was already too dark behind me to see much. Something about it nagged at me. The way it didn't react, didn't flinch from the headlights, didn't even seem to notice the car. I kept driving for maybe a minute, maybe less, before I pulled a U-turn in the middle of the road. Just a gut feeling. I figured if it was someone in trouble, I couldn't just leave them out there. I drove back, slower this time, looking both sides of the road, headlights sweeping out into the brush, but there was nothing there. No person, no animal, no sign anyone had been there at all. I turned around again and sat there idling for a few seconds. No sound except the engine. I remember thinking maybe it was a signpost or a bush that just looked like a person. That happens sometimes in low light, but I looked right at it when I passed. I knew what I saw. I kept going, back on my original route, trying to shake it off. But the whole drive after that felt different. The road looked the same, but I couldn't relax. I kept checking my mirrors, glancing at the passenger window, listening for sounds. There was nothing, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something had changed. About 30 minutes later, I pulled into a gas station on the edge of town. It was closed, but the lot lights were still on, and I just sat there for a while trying to decompress. I got out, stretched my legs, checked the tires, did all the normal stuff. Nothing weird. I was debating whether to mention it to anyone when I got home. Decided against it. A couple days later, I remembered my dash cam. It's an old one, mounted to the windshield just behind the rearview mirror. Nothing fancy, just loops over the last few hours unless you pull the card. I'd mostly forgotten it was running. But I got curious, so I took the card out and checked the footage on my laptop. It's a weird thing to watch yourself drive. You don't realize how fast the world looks flying by in real time. But I found the moment where I saw the figure just before midnight. GPS coordinates in the corner. I slowed it down to half speed. And yeah, there was something there. Clear as day. You see the headlights pick it up maybe 50 feet ahead. It's standing upright, just off the white line on the shoulder. Not moving. The car drives past it in 2 seconds. You can't see a face or clothes or even really features. But it's definitely not a bush or a post. The shape is too clean, like a person standing with their arms at their sides. But here's the part that made my stomach drop. As I drive past it, the head turns. Not fast, just slowly, like it was following the car, watching me go by. Then it goes still again. The camera quality's not great, but it's enough to see the motion. The body doesn't move, just the head. I watched it at least 10 times, trying to tell myself it was some trick of light or maybe the angle. But the turn is too smooth, too real. I checked the timestamp. I'd flipped around less than a minute later, but when I scroll ahead to the return pass, there's nothing on the shoulder. No movement, no shape, no anything. I tried freezing the frame when I first spot it. The best way I can describe it is blank. Not blurry, just lacking detail. Like something that should look like a person but doesn't quite. There's no face, no color, just a black figure. I still have the footage saved. I haven't shown it to anyone, not because I'm hiding it, but because I don't know what to say. It's not dramatic, it doesn't prove anything, and yet it still gets under my skin in a way I can't explain. I haven't driven that highway at night since. It was a Sunday afternoon in late August, around 6. Hot, not a cloud in the sky. I was flying my drone in the field behind the old quarry, which I'd done a bunch of times before. The spot's kind of perfect. Big open space, no people, no power lines or trees to get in the way. It's technically private land, but no one's used it in years. There's a crumbling gate and some rusted out machinery off to the side, but it's mostly just tall grass and gravel now. I'd been out there for maybe an hour just getting wide tracking shots and playing with low altitude maneuvers. I'm not a pro or anything, just a guy with a DJI drone and too much free time. I like to fly slow and low and then speed it up in post, so most of what I shoot is pretty basic. At some point, I switched the drone to follow mode and jogged a loop around the field, letting it track me from behind. Everything was normal. After that, I brought it up high, like 300 feet, and just let it hover while I scrolled through some of the shots on the controller. I wasn't looking at the live feed for a minute or two. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and glancing up at the drone, just this tiny white dot against the blue sky, totally still. Then something flickered on the screen. Not a glitch, not a freeze, just a flash of movement. I tapped to center the camera and saw something dart across the frame from right to left. It was small, but clear. Not a bird, not an insect on the lens. This thing moved too straight and too fast, like it knew exactly where it was going. I thought maybe it was another drone, but I'd have heard it. I spun the camera and tried to follow, but there was nothing for a few seconds. Then it came back. Same object, this time from the opposite direction, but it didn't turn. It just reversed. Like it hit an invisible wall and shot back the way it came, same speed, no curve or arc. It wasn't banking or tilting like a drone would. It was dead straight. I tapped to track it manually and managed to lock on for maybe 2 seconds. The feed zoomed and centered and I could see it better. Dull gray, no lights, no rotors, no wings. Just a short cylinder, kind of like a thermos. Then it stopped. Midair. No deceleration, it just froze in place. I stared at the feed, not moving, waiting for it to drop or drift or something. It didn't. It hovered for maybe 3 seconds, still no sound, and then shot straight up. I mean up. Not at an angle. Directly vertical, like someone dragged it out of the sky with a fishing line. Gone in a second. Into nothing. I looked up physically to see if I could spot it with my eyes, but there was nothing. Just empty sky. I remember looking back at the controller and rewinding the footage, scrubbing through frame by frame. I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it was a glitch in the app, but the footage was clean. You could see it enter, pause, reverse, stop, and vanish. All smooth, no stutter. Then the drone started drifting. Not much, just a foot or two, but it wasn't responding right. I nudged the controls and got nothing for a second. Then it jolted sideways. I pulled back to descend and it hesitated again before finally dropping. The lag was bad, like I was losing signal, but the controller said connection was strong. When it got to about 80 feet, it started spinning slowly. I didn't touch the yaw stick, it just started rotating on its own. Not fast, but steady. I tried to correct, and nothing happened. I held the joystick down to land it, and it slowed, then stopped descending completely at maybe 60 feet. Then the screen went black. Not the whole controller, just the video feed. Battery was still good, GPS lock was still green, but the camera feed was gone. I could still hear the drone buzzing overhead, but I couldn't see anything. I waited a second, hoping it would come back. Then I heard something else, not from the drone, on the ground. It sounded like a single step on gravel, maybe 20 feet behind me, just one. I turned fast, but there was nothing, just the field, flat and empty. The grass wasn't even moving, no wind. I looked back up, and the drone was still hovering, not spinning anymore, but still stuck. I tried switching to sport mode to force it down faster. Nothing. Still no video feed. Another sound behind me. Same spot. One step. Crunch. I turned again, slower this time, scanning the ground. Still no one. I was alone. I'd parked on the other side of the quarry, maybe a 5-minute walk. No one else's car was there when I came in. I hadn't heard anything the whole time I'd been out. Then I noticed the sound had stopped. Not just the footsteps. Everything. No wind, no birds, no bugs. It was like someone had muted the whole field. I don't know how else to explain it. I could hear the blood in my ears, but nothing else. I looked up again and the drone was descending. Slowly at first, then normal speed. The video feed came back halfway down, fuzzy at first and then clear. It touched down right where it had launched and just sat there. No spinning, no weird movement. I didn't pack up right away. I just stood there with the controller in my hands, listening. The silence held for a few more seconds, then the breeze kicked up again. I heard a crow in the distance. Just like that, everything went back to normal. I turned the drone off and packed it into my case, then walked back to the car a little faster than usual. I didn't play any music on the drive home. I just kept replaying the footage in my head, trying to make sense of it. When I got back, I dumped the files onto my laptop. The footage was all there. The object showed up exactly like I remembered. Fast, smooth, sharp turns with no angle. The vertical shot was the clearest part. It literally went from dead stop to gone in under a second. Frame by frame, it just vanished into the blue. No trail, no distortion, no shadow. Just gone. I checked the telemetry data too. The drone had no errors logged during the spin or the signal loss. Battery voltage stayed normal. Compass didn't spike. It all looked clean. I've gone back to that field since, a few times actually. Never seen anything like that again. Every time I fly now, I keep one eye on the sky and one on the live feed. But it's all been normal. Nothing weird, nothing I couldn't explain. Except for that one day. It started around 9:20 p.m., give or take a couple minutes. I was in the living room with the TV on mute, half watching a baseball game, while scrolling through my phone. The window over the couch was cracked open to let the breeze in, and everything outside was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, just real still. I remember because I'd been thinking about how unusually quiet it was, even for our town. We're out in the hills, maybe 1,200 people total, and nights are usually peaceful, but not like that. There's always at least a dog barking in the distance or a truck on the highway. But that night, nothing. Then I felt it. This weird pressure, like a low bass note you don't hear so much as feel in your chest. Not loud exactly, but it came on fast, like flipping a switch. My whole body felt like it was buzzing inside. Not vibrating, just this hum that seemed to settle in my bones. A second later, there was this bright white flash outside. Not lightning. It wasn't jagged or streaky. It didn't light up the clouds or sky. Just one big pulse of light, like someone had flipped on a stadium light pointed straight at the house. It lasted maybe half a second. I didn't even have time to react. The lights in the house cut out immediately after. Whole place went dark and silent. Even the fridge and the ceiling fan stopped dead. I stood up, thinking Transformer maybe blue, but when I looked out the front window, every house on our street was dark too. That almost never happens. Our power goes out sometimes, sure, but usually just us or a couple homes, not the whole block. I grabbed the flashlight I keep by the back door and stepped out onto the porch. I wasn't the only one. A few of my neighbors were outside already, standing in their driveways with their own flashlights or phones out. Everyone looked confused, nobody talking at first. Then I saw Dave across the street walking toward me. He's in his 70s, lives alone. He looked shaken, not scared exactly, just unsettled. He said, "Did you feel that hum right before the light?" I nodded. He looked relieved, like he thought maybe he was imagining it. Other folks started trickling out then. Janelle from the corner house, the Garcias next door. Same story. Everyone said they felt it in their chest. Some felt it in their teeth. Janelle said she was laying on the couch and thought her heart skipped a beat when it hit. One guy, Josh, said he'd been working on his truck and dropped a wrench when the hum started. The wrench didn't make any sound when it hit the concrete. That part stuck with me. He swore it, said it was like all the noise in the world had been sucked out. That was just the beginning. I walked down the street a bit to see if the power was out further up. The whole neighborhood was dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, even the cell towers on the ridge were off, no blinking lights. That creeped me out more than anything. We don't get perfect blackout skies here, not really. There's always some glow from the truck stop 5 miles down, or from the big farms out toward the east. But that night, nothing. The sky looked wrong, too flat. I could see stars, but they didn't seem right. Like some of them were missing, and others were too bright. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Someone said their generator wouldn't start. I tried my own, same issue, wouldn't even click. My neighbor tried starting his car and it was dead too. Battery had been fine earlier that day. A few others checked their vehicles, same thing. One or two trucks still started, but most were just completely dead. No lights, no sound, not even dash indicators. Then someone pointed up, not shouting, just kind of a startled, "Hey!" And we all looked. There was something in the sky. Not a shape exactly, more like a patch of sky that wasn't quite right. A section that didn't match the stars around it. It was maybe the size of a large SUV, just hanging there. No movement, no noise. You couldn't see an outline or edges, but you could tell something was there because the stars behind it were gone. Or maybe just dimmed, like it was sucking in light or blocking it perfectly. We watched it for maybe a minute. Nobody talked much, just whispered things like, "What the hell is that?" and "Is it moving?" I couldn't tell if it was. Every few seconds, I thought it shifted slightly, but it might have just been my eyes playing tricks. Then the hum came back. Not all at once, gradual this time. Built up like a migraine in the air. I felt it deep in my gut, and the hair on my arms stood up. Dave sat down on the curb and covered his ears, even though it wasn't loud in the normal sense. One of the Garcias started crying softly. No one was panicking, but everyone looked like they didn't know where to put their hands. Like our bodies didn't know how to react. The shape, or whatever it was, started to fade then. Not shoot off or blink away. Just slowly stopped being visible. The stars behind it came back little by little. Once it was gone, the hum dropped off too, like someone slowly turning a dial down to 0. About 10 seconds later, half the porch lights on the block flicked on at the same time. Then the street lights. My house came back online with a loud click, like the surge protector under the TV had just woken up. Everyone's phones lit up again. A couple cars alarmed randomly, then shut off. The weirdest part? My watch said 9:21. I swear the whole thing took longer than that. Felt like at least 20 minutes had passed. The rest of the night was quiet. A few people stayed outside and talked, but most went back in. Nobody called the cops or anything. What would we say? The next day I asked around. Almost everyone in town felt the hum. Some folks near the edge of town didn't see the light, but their power went out at the exact same time. Two guys who live over by the grain silos said they saw birds take off all at once just before it happened. Not flying in a group, just shooting off in every direction like they'd been startled. There was no official explanation. The power company blamed a substation surge, but that didn't cover the vehicles stalling or the generators not working, and nobody mentioned the hum or the shape in the sky. Not in any public way. I still don't know what we saw. All I know is it wasn't just me, and it wasn't normal. I've lived here 43 years. I've seen tornadoes, chemical fires, ice storms. That night didn't fit any of those. It felt like something passed over us, or through us. I worked as a forest ranger for just over 30 years, most of it up in northern Idaho. Remote areas, thick timber, no cell coverage for miles in any direction. You learn to spot things that don't belong real quick out there. You have to. This happened in my 22nd year. I remember because it was the summer I thought I was going to quit. Budget cuts, low morale, and I just started getting these stabbing headaches I thought were stress-related. I was patrolling an old game trail near Loon Ridge, an area we hadn't checked in a while. It was early, around 6:30 a.m., and already warm. Quiet. No wind, no animals, not even bugs. I remember noticing how silent it was, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That happens sometimes. About a mile up the trail, I spotted a deer maybe 30 yards ahead. Doe, medium size. She hadn't seen me yet. She was stepping out into a clearing with one front leg lifted, mid-stride. And then she just froze. I don't mean she paused like animals do when they sense something. I mean she stopped. One leg still raised, like she was partway through walking and got stuck. I stood there watching, waiting for her to bolt, but she didn't. I crouched slowly and stayed still. Figured maybe she'd caught a whiff of me and was waiting to decide what to do. But then, real slow, her head tilted upward. Not like a sniff, not alert, just straight up toward the sky. Her neck stretched all the way back until her nose pointed almost straight above her. And she stayed like that. Didn't twitch, didn't blink, no ear movement, no tail flick, just completely still, like she'd been frozen mid-step with her face toward the sky. I remember checking my watch a few times. The first minute passed, then 2, then 5. I started whispering to myself, little things like, "What the hell is this?" and "Come on, move." I even tossed a small rock into the brush behind her at one point. No reaction. At around the 10-minute mark, maybe a little more, she finally lowered her leg, brought her head back down, and walked off into the trees like nothing had happened. Not a sprint. Just casual, like any normal day. I stood up and scanned the sky, thinking maybe there'd been a sound I didn't notice, or a shadow, or something I'd missed. But there was nothing. Just blue. Clear and still. I walked over to where she'd been standing. The grass was dry and undisturbed. No signs of injury, no traps, no weird prints. But standing in the spot she'd just left, I felt, I don't know, off balance. Like something was pushing slightly on my ears, the way it feels before a storm breaks. Only there wasn't a cloud in sight. Later that afternoon, I logged the sighting but didn't put anything weird in the report. Just noted deer activity near Loon Ridge. Didn't feel like trying to explain what I saw. I thought about it a lot that week. Went back up 2 days later. Different time of day, early evening this time. I wasn't expecting anything, just figured I'd check the area again, maybe see if she came back. I walked the same path, stopped at the same clearing, and there was another deer. Different one, buck this time. Same posture. Mid-step, head tilted upward. I didn't move. He stood that way for a shorter time, maybe 4 minutes, and then walked away like nothing happened. I started sleeping with the window shut after that. Felt better when I couldn't see the sky. I never told anyone about the second deer. Didn't put it in my report, didn't want to deal with the looks. But the next time we did a rotation out by Loon Ridge, I made a point not to volunteer. Told them my knee was acting up. The headaches got worse for a while after that. I don't know if they were connected, but they started going away the further I stayed from that area. When I finally retired, I thought about going back one last time, just to see. I didn't. I was out fishing before sunrise, like I usually am on Saturdays. There's a lake about 15 minutes from my place. Not a big one, not touristy. Locals know it, but it's quiet. That's why I like it. I've been going there for years. Same spot right off the east dock where the tree line breaks and you get that open view of the water. That morning was calm. Real calm. Not even a ripple on the surface, and the air was heavy, like it gets in early fall when the fog hugs the ground and everything feels muffled. I parked my truck, grabbed my thermos and rod, and walked out onto the dock. No wind, no bugs, just stillness. I remember noticing how flat the water was, like glass. It was the kind of stillness where even the birds hadn't started up yet. I cast out and sat down, sipped some coffee, watched the sky lighten up just a bit. That blue-gray before the sun comes over the trees. After maybe 20 minutes, I saw something move on the water. Not on top of it, in the reflection. It was this dark shape, long and kind of oval, almost like the silhouette of a big bird, but the movement was weird, smooth. It was gliding in the lake's reflection like it was above me, but when I looked up, there was nothing. No bird, no plane. Sky was empty. I stood up, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light, but when I moved, the shape stayed exactly where it was in the reflection. It didn't shift like it would if it were a cloud or something natural. It just hovered there. The more I stared at it, the more off it felt. The edges weren't sharp, but they weren't blurred either. Just this consistent dark mass and totally silent. I pulled out my phone to try and take a picture, but the screen stayed black, like it wouldn't wake up. I held the power button, tapped the screen, nothing. I checked my watch, one of those cheap digitals, and the numbers were just frozen. 5:42. Didn't change. That's when I started feeling, I don't know, pressured, I guess. Not like a sound or a headache, but something pushing down on everything. on my shoulders, on the air. The dock creaked like it does when someone else steps onto it, but I was alone. I backed up a little, didn't reel in my line, just stepped away from the edge. When I looked down again, the shape had moved, closer to where I'd been sitting. Still just in the reflection. Still nothing in the sky. Then the birds started up, all at once. Loud and frantic, like a switch got flipped. Crows, mostly. They came out of the trees behind me and flew across the lake, but none of them went over that shape. They veered hard around it, like they were dodging something they could see that I couldn't. I looked up again, squinting. The sky looked normal, pale, cloudless, but my skin felt wrong, like I had sunburn, only cold. After a minute or two, the shape started to drift. Not in the water, again, it was never in the water, but the reflection showed it moving west, like it was sliding across the sky slowly. I followed it with my eyes, and when it got near the treetops on the far side of the lake, it just wasn't there anymore. Not like it flew off. It just vanished from the reflection, and the weight in the air lifted almost instantly. My phone buzzed, screen lit up like normal. The time said 6:08. That didn't make sense, though. I'd looked at my watch right before it froze at 5:42, and this whole thing felt like maybe 10 minutes, tops. My coffee was still warm. I packed up fast. Didn't even reel in my line, just cut it and left the rod in the truck bed. On the way back down the trail, I passed this old guy who sometimes fishes the West End. He nodded like always, but as I passed, he looked over the water and said, "You see it?" I stopped. Asked him what he meant. He didn't answer, just kept walking toward the lake. I didn't sleep that night. Kept checking the ceiling, expecting something to be above me. I didn't go back the next weekend either. A couple weeks later, I caved and returned in the afternoon just to see if anything looked different. Everything seemed normal, but when I walked out on the dock, the boards I'd stood on that morning were gray, sun-bleached almost, as if they'd aged faster than the rest. The nails around that spot were rusted too, but only there. No idea what it was. I don't talk about it much. Only reason I'm writing this down now is because last week my phone froze at 5:42 again, just for a second. Right as I passed that old guy's truck parked near the lake. I didn't stop, just kept driving. Haven't been back since. I was doing a solo night hike up a section of the Appalachian Trail near Damascus, Virginia. It wasn't anything extreme, just an overnight loop I'd done a few times before, out past Backbone Rock. I liked going at night sometimes. It sounds weird, but with the right headlamp and gear, it's peaceful. No crowds, no bikers, just forest. I started around 7 p.m., late fall, just getting cold enough at night to see your breath. I figured I'd do about 6 miles in, camp, then finish the loop in the morning. The trail was familiar enough that I didn't need to check GPS much. I had service for the first couple miles, but lost it after the switchbacks. Everything was normal for a while. I could hear some wind through the trees, a few owls, some rustling here and there. I kept a steady pace, took a break to drink some water. Nothing strange. My headlamp lit the trail fine. I don't carry much, just a small pack, tarp, water, and my phone for emergencies. It was about 10 p.m. when I noticed a light off to the right, down through the trees. It was maybe 100 yards off the trail, low to the ground, just hovering. My first thought was another hiker, maybe someone setting up camp or walking with a lantern, but it wasn't flickering or moving. It was just there, steady, white and round, maybe the size of a basketball from where I stood. I turned off my headlamp to get a better look. The light didn't waver at all. No shadows, no flickering. It wasn't attached to anything. I watched it for a minute or two, expecting it to move or fade, but it just stayed perfectly still. It wasn't casting any light around it either, like the glow didn't touch the branches or the ground, which I only noticed because everything else got so dark. I decided to try filming it. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, but as soon as I lifted it, the screen went completely black. Not like it was off, more like it was frozen. Backlight on, but no image, just a dark screen. I pressed the power button, but it didn't respond. I held it down for a hard reset, nothing. The haptic feedback wasn't even working. I tapped the screen a few times, swiped, still black. I lowered the phone and looked back at the light. Still there, still completely silent. No bugs, no wind now. just this unnatural quiet. I don't know why, but I suddenly had this urge to back away. Not run, not panic, just a solid instinct that I wasn't supposed to get closer. I hadn't even left the trail yet. I turned around slowly and started walking back the way I came, just enough to get some distance. After about 20 steps, I glanced back, and the light was gone. I stopped and checked my phone again. This time the screen lit up like normal, and the home screen was back. Camera worked fine. I even took a picture of the trail, just to be sure. Battery hadn't drained, no overheating warning, nothing in the logs when I checked later. I kept walking, didn't turn my light back on for a while. I just wanted to get to camp and be done with the night. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt off, like something was watching or waiting. I made it to my usual camping spot, about a mile further, near a clearing where I could see some stars. I didn't build a fire, just ate a protein bar, drank some water, laid under the tarp, and waited for morning. Every little sound made me flinch. I didn't sleep much, maybe an hour or two in short bursts. Around 3 a.m., I thought I saw the same light again, this time way farther off, up the ridge across the clearing. It was just barely visible through the trees, hovering above the ground again. I didn't get up. I didn't try to film it. I just laid there, facing away, holding my breath. After maybe 20 minutes, it was gone. I left before sunrise and didn't stop until I got back to my car. I didn't see anyone else on the trail, no signs of campsites or other hikers. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? The phone never acted up again. I checked the GPS logs later, and there was a 5-minute gap around the time I first saw the light. Could have been the signal or nothing. But it was weird. It's never done that before. That was 8 months ago. I still hike, but not alone at night. I was driving through Sand Ridge Canyon late last October, coming back from a job site in Utah. I took that route mostly to avoid the interstate. It's a longer drive, but less traffic and kind of peaceful in its own way. Just miles of empty land, low scrub, some red rock formations, and the occasional pull-off for campers or hikers. Not a lot of people out there, especially that late in the season. It was maybe 6:30 p.m., just starting to get dark. The sun was behind me, and the canyon ahead was already in shadow. I was about halfway through the narrowest stretch, maybe 10 miles from any building or paved road, when my radio cut out. Not static, just dead silence. I didn't think much of it. That happens sometimes out there. Cell service was already gone, had been for a while, but then the GPS screen on my dash froze. It didn't crash, just stopped updating. I was watching the little car icon sit there, not moving, even though I was doing about 40. Then it blinked off and showed that spinning, searching for signal symbol. I slowed down a little. Not because I was lost, I knew the road pretty well, but it just felt off. The air outside was totally still, not even wind through the trees, which was weird. It had been breezy earlier that day. I rolled down the window to check if maybe I had a flat. The tires sounded normal, but I remember it being too quiet, like overly quiet. No insects, no birds, nothing, just the hum of the engine. A few minutes later, as I came around a bend, I noticed a soft white light coming from behind the ridge to the left. At first, I thought it was the moon coming up, but the shape was wrong and it was too low. I figured it might have been some truck or off-road vehicle up there. People do some crazy backcountry stuff. But then the lights rose higher, maybe 30, 40 feet above the ridge, and I realized they weren't headlights or spotlights. There were 5 of them, arranged in a perfect arc. They weren't bright, just a dull glow like frosted bulbs behind glass. Totally uniform in size and spacing. Perfect circles. I slowed down to a crawl and just watched them hover there. They didn't blink or move at first. Just sat above the ridge, completely steady. I pulled off to the side of the road and killed the engine. As soon as the motor shut off, the silence got even heavier. I've never heard silence like that. It was like everything had been muffled. I stepped out of the truck and stood there, staring up. The lights started to rise, slowly, not fast. Smooth, no sound. No rotor wash, no humming, nothing. They went straight up, maybe in another couple hundred feet, then paused again. I looked around to see if anyone else had pulled off the road, but there was nothing. Just me and the truck. Then the lights started to move horizontally, still in the arc formation. They drifted behind a patch of thin clouds and dimmed a little but didn't vanish. I watched them move for maybe 20 seconds and then they just disappeared. Not blinked out, just gradually faded into the clouds until there was nothing. I stood there for a minute or two, waiting to hear something, feel anything. Wind, vibration, a sound from farther off, but the air stayed still. I kept checking my GPS. Still nothing. Radio, dead. Phone, 0 bars. I got back in the truck and kept driving, slower than before. Every now and then I'd glance in the mirror or out the side windows, trying to catch another glimpse of those lights. But the canyon walls were too high in that stretch, and by the time I was out of that bend, the sky was dark. About 10 minutes later, the radio popped back on mid-song like nothing had happened. GPS blinked a few times, then reconnected. My phone picked up a weak bar or two, enough to load a text from earlier in the day. I didn't stop again until I hit the highway. Once I had a real signal, I tried checking the area on satellite maps, just out of curiosity. Nothing stood out. No towers, no structures, nothing unusual. Just open land and rock. The weirdest part was the lights themselves. They were too perfectly arranged. No wobble, no drift, and they were dead silent. Even drones make some noise, and helicopters definitely do. These didn't make a sound, and the way they faded into the clouds, it didn't look like they were flying away, more like they just dissolved. I told a couple friends about it later. One thought it might have been flares, but I've seen flares. These weren't that. Flares move erratically. They flicker, they drop. These moved in a slow, steady, controlled way, like they were being guided by something. I didn't report it or anything, not sure what I would even say. There's no footage. My dash cam had cut off when the GPS went down, and it didn't save anything before that. I've checked it a dozen times since. The file just stops mid-drive, then starts again 10 minutes later with a timestamp gap. Like, those minutes didn't record. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I kept checking the sky every couple minutes, half expecting something else to show up. It didn't. I saw it while I was walking the south end of the field, early August. The corn was about shoulder height then, maybe a little taller. I usually walk the rows every few days that time of year, just to check for pests or storm damage. Nothing weird had ever happened out there before. It's just flat land, no neighbors close by, and I've been farming it since my dad passed. That morning, I was maybe 20 minutes into the walk when I noticed something off with the soil ahead. It looked darker than usual, patchy almost. At first I figured it was just where some fungus had killed off a few stalks, which happens sometimes when it rains too much, but this was different. The corn around it was standing tall, no signs of rot or wilting. But in the middle of the row, just a few feet off the center path, there was this near-perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across. Not trampled or cut down like those crop circles you see on TV. This was baked. The soil was black, fine, almost powdery, and everything inside the circle was gone. Not just dead, gone. No stalks, no roots. It was like something had scooped the plants out and torched the dirt. I knelt down and touched it. Still cool. No smell either. Not even that usual burnt scent you get when lightning hits something. And that was the first thing I checked. Looked up for scorch marks. Maybe a tree or line nearby got hit and the fire spread. But there's nothing tall around that spot. The sky had been clear all week. I didn't bring my phone out with me that day, so I just marked the row with the broken stick and went back for it. Took a few photos when I got back, but none of them really show the strangeness of it. Just looks like a big burnt circle in the dirt. Still, I figured maybe a freak lightning strike or an old chemical barrel underground or something. Weird, but not impossible. That night, I kept thinking about it. Around midnight, I finally gave in and grabbed a flashlight. Drove the ATV back down there. I don't really know what I was expecting. I just couldn't stop thinking about how clean the edges were, like it had been measured out and baked perfectly. The field was dead silent when I got there, not even crickets. That was the first thing that made my skin crawl a little. Usually out there, you hear bugs or frogs or something, especially in summer. But there was nothing. I walked to the edge of the circle again and shined the flashlight across it. It almost looked like glass in some spots, like the dirt had been fused, though not completely. just little patches that reflected light weirdly. That's when I heard it, a soft, low humming. Not mechanical exactly, almost like when you stand near high voltage lines, that quiet buzz. It wasn't coming from one direction, more like it was just there, all around, but low, right on the edge of hearing. I turned off the flashlight, thinking maybe it was something with the batteries, but the sound didn't stop, just kept going, steady. I didn't stay long after that. Back at the house, I left the porch light on and sat at the kitchen table for a while. The noise had stopped by the time I drove back, or maybe I just couldn't hear it over the engine. I told myself I'd go out again in the morning and see if it was still there. It was, and it was bigger. Only by a few inches, maybe a foot, but enough that I noticed right away. I'd marked the edge with that stick, remember? Well, now the stick was inside the burn, shriveled and black. The soil around the new edge looked the same, burnt fine and completely clean of plant matter. But again, nothing around it was damaged, not even the leaves on the corn right at the edge. Like someone had taken a giant cookie cutter, heated it to 1,000 degrees, and pressed it into the ground overnight. That same day, I checked all my irrigation lines, thinking maybe some kind of short or leak caused an electrical fire underground. Everything checked out. I dug a foot down at the center of the circle, and it was just dry, black dirt all the way. No roots, no worms, no moisture. I even ran the metal detector out there. Nothing. The next 2 nights, I stayed inside. I didn't want to go back out there in the dark, not after that humming. But I didn't sleep much either. Around 3 a.m. the second night, I noticed the motion light by the barn flick on. I looked out the window, but didn't see anything. No wind, no animals. Sometimes the wind triggers it, but this was one of those still hot nights, the kind where everything feels heavy. Next morning, I went out again. The circle hadn't grown. I felt a weird sense of relief, like maybe whatever had happened was done, until I walked back toward the house. There was another one. This time, it was at the edge of the north field near where I keep the equipment. Smaller, maybe 5 or 6 feet across, but same thing. Perfectly round, cleanly scorched, no damage to anything around it. No prints, no tire tracks. I'd been all over that part of the field the day before and it hadn't been there. I walked straight back to the house, locked the door, and stayed inside most of the day. Called a guy I know from the co-op, asked if he'd ever seen soil burn like that without catching nearby crops. He said maybe if there was magnesium in the dirt or some weird contamination, but he'd never heard of it happening naturally. Told me to get it tested. I did. Took samples from both circles and from just outside them. The lab said there was unusually high potassium and phosphorus in the scorched spots, but nothing that explained the heat damage. No signs of accelerants, no chemical residue, just dirt burnt hard. The third circle showed up 3 days later. This one was right outside the fence near the gravel road. I spotted it from the porch, plain as day. That night, I sat up in the living room with the lights off, watching through the windows. I don't know what I thought I'd see. I had a rifle next to me, not that it would have helped with anything that could do that. At some point around 2 a.m., the power flickered. Just once. Enough to shut off the fridge and kick it back on. I checked the breakers, all fine. A few minutes later, the motion light by the barn came on again. I didn't go out there, just waited, watching. Nothing. Next morning, I walked the yard, the barn, the whole south field again. The original circle was still there, unchanged. The other 2 were still clean, still black. No new ones, but I started noticing something else. The corn nearest the burns, it had stopped growing. Not dying, just frozen. Same height, same color, like it was in stasis or something. I marked one stalk with a bit of twine and measured it. Came back 2 days later, no change. Rest of the field was still climbing like normal. That's when I stopped going out at night. A week passed, then 2. No more circles. But then the sky started acting weird. I don't mean lightning or storms. I mean a kind of light I hadn't seen before. One night, just before full dark, I was closing up the shed and saw this faint shimmer above the west field. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or satellite. It was more like a reflection, like when heat rises off pavement, except it was 30 or 40 feet up. Just hanging there, barely moving. It pulsed once, slow and dim, and then it was gone. No sound, no trails. I walked out there the next morning, no new circles. but the grass along the fence line was lying flat, like something had pushed it down in a wide, shallow arc. Again, no prints, no scorch marks, just pressure. I didn't tell anyone after that. I figured no one would believe me, or worse, they'd come snooping around. I didn't want people on the property, especially not if this thing, whatever it was still showing up. The last thing that happened was almost subtle. I was harvesting late September, running the combine across the north rows. One of the panels near the exhaust pipe started rattling, so I stopped the machine to check it out. When I stepped down, I noticed the sound again, that faint humming. This time it was stronger, almost like it was coming from under the soil. I shut the combine off and just stood there, listening. The hum was steady, and I could feel it in my boots, like a vibration through the ground. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then cut off mid-note. Not faded. Stopped. Haven't heard it since. The soil samples are still in a box in the garage. Some nights I think about sending them to a university or something. Other nights I think I should bury them. But most nights I just don't go near the fields after dark. I was doing a solo night hike up a section of the Appalachian Trail near Damascus, Virginia. It wasn't anything extreme, just an overnight loop I'd done a few times before, out past Backbone Rock. I liked going at night sometimes. It sounds weird, but with the right headlamp and gear, it's peaceful. No crowds, no bikers, just forest. I started around 7 p.m., late fall, just getting cold enough at night to see your breath. I figured I'd do about 6 miles in, camp, then finish the loop in the morning. The trail was familiar enough that I didn't need to check GPS much. I had service for the first couple miles, but lost it after the switchbacks. Everything was normal for a while. I could hear some wind through the trees, a few owls, some rustling here and there. I kept a steady pace, took a break to drink some water, nothing strange. My headlamp lit the trail fine. I don't carry much, just a small pack, tarp, water, and my phone for emergencies. It was about 10 p.m. when I noticed a light off to the right, down through the trees. It was maybe 100 yards off the trail, low to the ground, just hovering. My first thought was another hiker. Maybe someone setting up camp or walking with a lantern, but it wasn't flickering or moving. It was just there. Steady, white, and round. Maybe the size of a basketball from where I stood. I turned off my headlamp to get a better look. The light didn't waver at all. No shadows, no flickering. It wasn't attached to anything. I watched it for a minute or two, expecting it to move or fade, but it just stayed perfectly still. It wasn't casting any light around it either, like the glow didn't touch the branches or the ground, which I only noticed because everything else got so dark. I decided to try filming it. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, but as soon as I lifted it, the screen went completely black. Not like it was off, more like it was frozen. Backlight on, but no image, just a dark screen. I pressed the power button, but it didn't respond. I held it down for a hard reset. Nothing. The haptic feedback wasn't even working. I tapped the screen a few times, swipe still black. I lowered the phone and looked back at the light. Still there. Still completely silent. No bugs, no wind now, just this unnatural quiet. I don't know why, but I suddenly had this urge to back away. Not run, not panic. Just a solid instinct that I wasn't supposed to get closer. I hadn't even left the trail yet. I turned around slowly and started walking back the way I came, just enough to get some distance. After about 20 steps, I glanced back and the light was gone. I stopped and checked my phone again. This time the screen lit up like normal, and the home screen was back. Camera worked fine. I even took a picture of the trail just to be sure. Battery hadn't drained. No overheating warning, nothing in the logs when I checked later. I kept walking, didn't turn my light back on for a while. I just wanted to get to camp and be done with the night. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt off, like something was watching or waiting. I made it to my usual camping spot about a mile further, near a clearing where I could see some stars. I didn't build a fire. Just ate a protein bar, drank some water, laid under the tarp, and waited for morning. Every little sound made me flinch. I didn't sleep much, maybe an hour or two in short bursts. Around 3 a.m., I thought I saw the same light again, this time way farther off, up the ridge across the clearing. It was just barely visible through the trees, hovering above the ground again. I didn't get up. I didn't try to film it. I just laid there, facing away, holding my breath. After maybe 20 minutes, it was gone. I left before sunrise and didn't stop until I got back to my car. I didn't see anyone else on the trail. No signs of campsites or other hikers. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? The phone never acted up again. I checked the GPS logs later, and there was a 5-minute gap around the time I first saw the light. Could have been the signal, or nothing. But it was weird. It's never done that before. That was 8 months ago. I still hike, but not alone at night. We were driving from Albuquerque to Flagstaff, taking the scenic route through Gallup. My girlfriend Carly and I had been on the road for a few hours already. We were doing this little southwest loop over a long weekend. Nothing fancy, just a break from work and city noise. It was early afternoon when we passed through Grants, New Mexico. We weren't in a rush, but we were both getting tired of road snacks and decided to stop for gas and maybe get something hot to eat. I remember it was one of those older gas stations on the edge of town, not part of any big chain. A faded awning, 2 pumps, little convenience store attached to it. There was nothing else around, just that long stretch of highway behind us and a whole lot of flat land ahead. We pulled in around what I thought was 2:30. Carly said she'd run in and grab some coffee while I pumped. There was no one else at the station, no clerk visible inside at first either. Just quiet. Too quiet. The kind where you start noticing how loud your own footsteps are. I finished filling up and went inside. It had that weird, faint chemical smell those places always have, old floor cleaner and stale chips. Carly was standing near the coffee machine, frowning at it. "It's not working," she said. "Just makes this sound, but nothing comes out." I looked at the machine. The power light was on, but it was humming kind of funny, like it was trying to heat up but couldn't quite get there. The clock on the wall behind the register said 2:17, which I remember thinking was weird because my phone said 2:39. Carly's phone matched mine, but the station clock was off by 20 minutes. We joked about it, said it probably hadn't been set for daylight savings or something. I grabbed a bottle of water and a candy bar. Carly picked out some trail mix. The guy behind the counter showed up while we were looking at the drinks. Tall, gray beard, kind of looked like he lived in the back. Didn't say much, just rang us up, handed us the receipt, and stared through us like we weren't really there. Not in a mean way, just vacant. We got back in the car and kept driving west. Nothing felt off. The sky was clear, radio was working, traffic was non-existent. Carly dozed off a bit after Milan, and I listened to some podcast about wilderness survival. We crossed into Arizona a little after 4 p.m., or at least that's what I thought. But then Carly looked at the clock on the dash and said, "Why is it already 5:30? I figured it was the time zone change. New Mexico is on mountain time, and so is Arizona, except Arizona doesn't do daylight savings. But it didn't account for the whole thing. We should have only gained an hour, Kat, not lost it." She checked her phone again. Then she pulled up the photo she took of the gas station because she thought the sign was funny. It had this old peeling logo that said gas and go and God. The timestamp said 2:12 p.m. That was the moment we pulled in. The receipt she handed me said the transaction was at 3:24. And yet somehow we hadn't left there until close to 4:30, based on when we crossed the border. We were missing a full hour, maybe more. Neither of us remembered doing anything else at the station. No long conversations, no weird detours, just pump, shop, drive. We tried to reason it out. Maybe we sat in the car longer than we thought. Maybe we stopped again and forgot, but we didn't. We checked our photos, call logs, texts, nothing. There was just this stretch of time where we were supposedly there, doing nothing. What really made it feel strange, though, was the road after. The sun was still up, but it felt dimmer than it should have. Like the light was slightly wrong. Carly said at first, "Does it seem darker than it should be?" And I'd already been thinking it. The landscape looked flat, drained. Colors were muted, almost like our windshield had a filter on it. A little past Sanders, Carly pointed out something in the distance. It looked like a cluster of birds at first, high up, kind of shifting in and out of formation. but the more we watched it, the less sense it made. The dots weren't fluttering or moving randomly. They were holding a perfect pattern, like a triangle, and just hovering. I slowed the car a little, trying to see better. The dots didn't seem to be moving forward or backward. They weren't blinking, but every now and then, one would sort of vanish, then reappear somewhere else nearby, still part of the shape. Not fast enough to be mistaken for movement, more like it blinked out and back in, just a few feet from where it was. Then they all faded at once. Not like they flew off, just slowly dissolved into the sky until they were gone. Carly asked me if I'd ever seen anything like that. I hadn't. Neither of us said much after that. We kept driving until we hit Holbrook and stayed the night at a cheap motel. The lobby clock didn't match our phones either. Off by a half hour this time. It felt like every clock we saw that day was wrong in a different way. Later that night, I checked the timestamps again on all the photos and videos from the trip so far. Everything made sense, except that one window between the gas station and the border. The GPS history on Google Maps showed a straight line, no long stops, no detours. Just one marker at the gas station and the next halfway to Arizona. No pings, no location data in between. The receipt's timestamp was the only proof that we'd been there as long as we had. But even then, it didn't explain why we couldn't account for the time ourselves. Carly said she had a weird dream that night. Said she kept hearing this low humming in the motel room, even though the AC was off. I didn't hear it. But when I woke up, I noticed both of our phones had been plugged in all night and barely charged. They were warm, like they'd been doing something all night, but there were no apps running, no updates. We drove on to Flagstaff the next morning, and it didn't talk about it much after that. I don't know what happened at that gas station, but I know we weren't just sitting there doing nothing for over an hour. I know something doesn't add up. I was up in the mountains for the start of deer season, camping solo about 4 miles off the nearest service road. Closest town was probably a 30-minute drive, even from the trailhead. So once I was out there, I was really out there. No cell reception, no traffic, no lights, just trees and wind and the occasional distant coyote. I'd picked that spot before, small clearing near a ridge, good view to the east, a natural slope that let me keep the tent dry if it rained. I brought enough food for 5 days and had planned to hike out Sunday night. It was Thursday when I noticed the first light. I'd gone to bed early that night, maybe around 10, after a long day hiking and sitting in the cold. I'd woken up sometime after 3, not from a sound or anything, just that weird, sudden alertness where you go from dead asleep to fully awake for no reason. My watch said 3:09 a.m. The inside of the tent was totally dark. No moon that night. I lay there a few minutes, listening. Then, at exactly 3:12, the tent lit up for about a second. Just a soft, bluish-white light that seemed to come from above, but it didn't cast shadows. It was like the whole clearing lit up evenly, all at once. No sound, no wind, then gone. I unzipped the tent, thinking maybe lightning, but the sky was clear. No clouds, no stars directly overhead either, which struck me as odd because I'd seen plenty earlier that night. It was like one part of the sky had gone blank. I stayed awake, maybe another half hour, didn't see or hear anything else. Eventually went back to sleep and didn't think much more about it in the morning. I chalked it up to being half asleep or maybe moonlight through thin clouds I hadn't noticed. But the next night, same thing. Woke up just after 3 a.m., no noise, just that sudden alert feeling. I didn't check the time this time, but I knew it was close. I sat up in my sleeping bag and waited. Around 3 minutes passed, then the light came again. Same exact feeling. One soft pulse of light, maybe a second long. Not bright enough to hurt, not sharp, just even and silent. The weirdest part was still the lack of shadows. My pack, my boots, everything in the tent, none of it cast any kind of shadow during the light. It was like the air itself glowed. I stayed up after that. I made coffee and sat outside for a bit, with Hess just watching the tree line. Nothing moved. No wind, no rustling. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. The next day, I didn't go far. I stayed within a mile of camp. My gut wasn't sitting right. The whole place felt, I don't know, different. Like the trees were listening. I've hunted that area for years, and I've had nights where I got spooked by a bear or couldn't sleep because of wind or whatever, but this was different. It wasn't fear exactly, just pressure. That third night, I didn't sleep. I wanted to see it from outside the tent. I had a little camp chair set up a few feet from the fire pit, and I sat there with a thermos of coffee and my headlamp off. Stars were out again, no clouds, cold air, dry leaves. At exactly 3:12, again, I checked my watch. The light came, but this time I saw where it started. It wasn't from the sky. It came from the tree line to the west of the clearing, like a wave, a slow pulse that rolled through the forest and over the clearing, heading east. It wasn't a beam or a flash. It was more like something invisible passed through the trees, and when it touched them, they lit up for that 1 second. It didn't light them like a flashlight would. It was diffuse. Everything glowed from within, like bioluminescence or something. My skin even looked pale blue for that second. No shadows again. No sound. No heat. It just moved through and was gone. I stood up, didn't even remember doing it, just stood there watching the forest. Nothing moved for a long time. Then I heard a branch crack off to the left, not close, maybe 100 yards. Just one snap, like weight shifting on a limb. I didn't move. I just stared into the dark where it came from. Then another, closer. I backed up slowly and went into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat with my knife in my hand. I didn't hear anything else that night. By the fourth day, I wanted to pack up, but I told myself if it happened again, I'd try to film it. I brought my phone out with me and set it on a rock pointing west. Sat in the chair like before, phone recording, same setup. Nothing happened at 3, no light, no sound. I waited until almost 4 before checking the footage. Nothing. No light, no noise, nothing out of place. It was like it knew I was trying to record it. I ended up deleting the video without really thinking about it. I went into the tent and lay down, and that's when I heard something new. It was a high tone, faint, like tinnitus, but not in my ears. It felt like it was outside, maybe 50 feet away, but I couldn't place a direction. It wasn't loud, it was just constant, steady. No wobble or static, just a single pitch. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. Total silence again. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew it was morning. That was my last day. I packed up fast, barely ate, didn't even make coffee. I started hiking out before 7. I didn't see any other campers on the way, which didn't surprise me. Most people don't bother going that deep during early season. But on the way down the trail, I noticed something odd. About halfway back to the service road, there was a big white scrape on the side of a tree, maybe chest height. At first I thought bear or elk, but there were no claw marks. It looked like the bark had just peeled off in a strip. Smooth, clean, like something dragged something metallic along it, about 6 feet long. There were 4 or 5 more like that as I kept going. Not clustered, spread out, different heights, no footprints around them, no animal tracks, just the trees, scraped like something tall and smooth had brushed past them on the way up. I didn't stop again until I got back to the car. Driving home, I kept thinking about the light, how it moved like a wave, how it didn't leave any sound behind, how everything stayed perfectly still during it. I've camped since then, but not alone, and not there. I did check the time each night that trip, out of habit. Woke up at 3:12 on the second night. No light, just regular dark. But I lay there waiting with that same pressure in my chest, like something might be just out of sight, watching, listening, waiting for me to fall back asleep. It started on a quiet Tuesday evening. I'd been at home out in the country, just me, my truck, and the fields stretching for miles. I hadn't driven that truck in 2 days, mostly because the weather had been crappy and I didn't really need to go anywhere. It's an old pickup, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I went outside around 9 p.m. to grab something from the back of the truck. When I got there, I noticed right away that the engine was running. The truck was just idling in the driveway. I froze for a second because I knew I hadn't touched it in days. The keys were definitely inside the house and nobody else had them. The radio was on too, not tuned to any station, just that constant white noise crackling through the speakers. the kind of static that comes when there's no signal but the radio is on full blast. It was weird because I always turn the radio off when I park. Hell, I barely listen to it at all. The doors were unlocked, which also didn't make sense. I'm the kind of guy who locks up every time I walk away, even for a minute. And with no one else around to mess with it, I couldn't figure out how this had happened. I was standing there trying to process it when a cold breeze hit me. The night was otherwise still. No wind, no animals making noise, just this sudden chill out of nowhere. I stepped back and looked inside the cab. The seats were empty, but the heater was on, blowing warm air. The dashboard lights were dim, but definitely lit. I'm telling you, everything was running like someone had just been sitting there, except no one was. I locked the doors, got inside, and turned off the engine. The radio stopped buzzing, and the heater shut off. But the whole time I kept looking out the windows. Nothing was moving outside, no cars, no people. Just the usual darkness of my driveway and the faint outline of the trees around the property. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the white noise from the radio, that crackling hum. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt about lights. Small, dim things flickering in the distance like fireflies, but too high up and too steady. Nothing I could make sense of. The next day, I told a few people about the truck, mostly joking about how maybe some ghost had taken it for a joyride, but the more I thought about it, the less funny it seemed. That afternoon, I checked the truck again. This time it was completely off, locked up tight. No strange noises, no lights. I figured maybe it was just some weird electrical glitch, a fuse sticking or something. Then came Wednesday night. I went to bed early, but around 2 a.m. I woke up to a faint humming noise. It was almost imperceptible, like a low drone coming from outside. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, steady, and pulsing. I got up, grabbed my phone, and peeked out the window. The yard was bathed in this pale, bluish light. It wasn't like anything from a street lamp or a car. The light was soft but unnatural, washing over the grass and the sides of the house. I stepped outside barefoot, and the humming got louder, filling the air like electricity buzzing before a storm. But the sky was clear, no clouds, no lightning, no planes or helicopters either. The light didn't seem to come from anything on the ground. When I looked up, there was nothing there, no moon, no stars, just the deep black sky. But the blue glow was everywhere, like it was coming from all around me. I felt a strange weight on my chest, like I was suddenly heavier. My limbs got sluggish. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. I walked back inside, closed the door, and sat down. The humming didn't stop. It was subtle but persistent, like a song stuck on repeat in the background of the world. I checked the truck again in the morning. It was fine. Engine off, doors locked. But when I started it up, the radio crackled a bit, as if trying to catch a signal but failing. I switched it off. Thursday evening, I left the house to grab some groceries. I locked the truck, took the keys, and went inside the store. When I came back about an hour later, the truck was still where I'd parked it, but something felt off. The doors were unlocked. Not just unlocked, one door was slightly ajar, like someone had leaned on it but never shut it properly. I swear to you, I had locked it when I left. I checked the keys in my hand. They were there. I went around the truck slowly, heart starting to beat faster. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was moved inside. No footprints in the dirt. The only weird thing was the door. I closed it firmly and locked the truck again. That night, the humming came back, softer this time, mixed with the occasional crackle of static. I kept the windows closed and the lights on. I stayed inside, watching the house from the window. Around midnight, I saw something. Down near the tree line behind the house, there was a flicker. A small pale light that didn't look like a flashlight or a phone. It stayed low to the ground, moving slowly, almost gliding. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to focus, but it was hazy, like the light was surrounded by a faint mist. I thought maybe it was an animal with some kind of reflective eyes, but the movement wasn't right. No creature I've ever seen moves that way. It disappeared after a minute, but the humming stayed. Over the next few days, things got stranger. The truck would be on sometimes when I wasn't home, but no one had the keys except me. The radio would catch static, sometimes snippets of words I couldn't make out, but no stations. Sometimes the door would be unlocked or slightly open, but nothing ever seemed stolen or disturbed. And that light, the blue glow, would show up now and then, mostly at night, low on the horizon or drifting just past the trees. One morning, I found muddy footprints near the back of the truck. They weren't my boots. They were smaller, narrower, like someone wearing sneakers. But nobody lives nearby, and no one ever told me they were around my place. I cleaned them off and kept an eye out, but I never saw anyone. I didn't tell the sheriff or neighbors. They'd probably think I was losing it. I kept a journal of what happened, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I wrote, the less it added up. I started to feel watched, like there was something just beyond my sight. Not threatening, but there, like a shadow always lurking just out of focus. I tried to ignore it. I kept living my life, going to work, fixing fences, doing the usual. But the truck? It's still unpredictable. Sometimes it's locked tight and cold to the touch. Other times the engine's running, the radio's on that same static buzz, and the doors are open like someone left in a hurry. I don't know how or why. I just know that every time I step outside and see that blue light creeping across the yard or hear the humming beneath the usual quiet, I get that same feeling, like I'm not alone, and maybe never really was. I'd been running loads between Laredo and Nashville for a few years when this happened. I was solo at the time, working for a mid-sized company with decent rigs and good routes. I like driving nights, less traffic, cooler air, just me and the road. This was last summer, late August, I think. I'd left Laredo around 5 p.m. with a full trailer headed to a warehouse outside Memphis, same route I'd done dozens of times. Weather was clear, road was dry, nothing out of the ordinary. I remember eating a gas station burrito around 10 near Dallas and fueling up before pushing northeast. It was around 2 a.m. when I crossed into Arkansas, just outside Hope. That's where it starts getting weird. I've got a dash cam that records everything, front-facing and cabin. My company requires it, and I usually don't think much about it. It loops automatically, stores clips to an SD card, uploads every few hours when I hit service. I've had it catch a few close calls with deer and one bad fender bender in Oklahoma, but nothing strange before this. Anyway, around 3:15 a.m. I was driving north on Highway 29, just past a rest stop I usually skip. The road there is pretty flat, surrounded by low pine. No lights, no towns for miles. I wasn't tired, not dangerously anyway. I'd had a Coke, windows cracked, just cruising. Then I noticed the radio cut out. Not a static fade, just silence. The screen stayed lit, but no audio. I tapped the knob, flipped stations, nothing. Thought maybe I hit a dead zone, but it had been playing fine for the last 100 miles. A few seconds later, my GPS screen froze. Time, speed, everything just stuck. I tapped it, but it didn't respond. My phone, mounted right next to it, was showing 317. The GPS said 308. I remember that because it felt off, like I was slipping behind somehow. Right then, I felt this pressure in my ears. Not a pop, like from altitude. Just a building tension, like the cabin was sealing itself off. I turned off the vent and listened. It was dead quiet except for the hum of the tires. No engine rattle, no wind, just the sound of the road. Then, just as quickly, everything came back. Radio kicked in mid-song, GPS jumped to 323. The phone was still at 323 too. I figured maybe I'd zoned out a bit and just hadn't noticed. I got to Memphis just after 7 a.m., unloaded, and checked in with dispatch. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I stopped for breakfast, I decided to scroll through the dash cam out of curiosity. I wanted to see if there was any weird interference during that silent period. That's when I saw the gap. From 3:08 a.m. to 3:23 a.m., both camera feeds were just gone. The files jumped from one timestamp to the next as if nothing happened. No corruption warning, no error message, just 15 minutes missing. Everything before and after was perfectly normal. The files were there, labeled in sequence, just those 15 minutes were missing entirely. I assumed maybe the card glitched, so I checked the backup on my laptop. Same thing. Every other hour of the drive was fine. It was just that one block, 3:08 to 3:23, missing from both the forward and cabin views. The weird part? The GPS shows I was still moving. I didn't pull over or stop. and my truck's logbook recorded steady speed the whole time. No sudden decelerations, no hard braking, just normal driving. I didn't think much more of it until later that night, when I was parked in a motel in Jackson, waiting for my next load. I decided to check the internal truck cam, the one above the rearview mirror that catches a wider angle of the cabin. I usually don't pull from it unless there's a reason. It just stores low-res footage as a backup. I synced it to my laptop, skipped ahead to the 3:08 timestamp. It recorded something. The clip was there, but it was off. The cabin was lit by the dash lights. You could see me, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I was driving. Not slumped over or unconscious, just blank. No blinking, no glancing at mirrors, no fidgeting, totally still. Eyes locked straight ahead. I watched it 3 times. It's hard to explain, but it didn't look like me. Not really. It looked like someone trying to be me. Like a really good actor who just couldn't quite get the movements right. I never moved, not once. Just drove straight for 15 minutes like I was on autopilot. Even creepier, my mouth was slightly open, not breathing heavy or anything, just open. No sound, just still. The truck didn't drift, didn't slow down. Everything on the instrument panel stayed normal. But the camera caught this flicker, like interference. Every few seconds, there'd be a quick pulse of static across the screen, horizontal lines, really fast. No sound with it, just a visual glitch. The outside cam didn't catch any of that, just the inside one. There weren't any headlights behind me, no oncoming cars. I checked the GPS playback. I was on a straight stretch the whole time, no turns, no exits, no stops. Just 15 miles of flat road and pine trees, driving with a blank stare and my mouth slightly open. After 3:23, everything snapped back to normal. In the next clip, I'm reaching for a drink, checking mirrors, blinking. I look tired, but alert. Just regular driving again. I showed the footage to a mechanic friend of mine who used to drive long haul. He said, maybe I nodded off with my eyes open, but that doesn't explain the dashcam footage still running before and after, or why only that one segment was missing, or why the backup cam caught it while the main one didn't. I didn't report it to dispatch. What would I even say? Truck drove itself while I sat there like a mannequin. I figured if there was an electrical fault, it would have shown up on diagnostics. But nothing did. A week later, I went back and checked the data again. The 3:08 to 3:23 clip from the internal cam had degraded. Not corrupted exactly, just fuzzier, like it had been copied and recopied too many times. The facial detail was harder to see. The flickers were still there though, still regular. Every 7 seconds, like clockwork. I started keeping an analog watch on the dash after that, just as a backup, something not tied to the system. I also swapped the SD card and ran a second cam in the sleeper cab, just in case. I've done that route 6 times since. Nothing weird, no lost time, no flickers, no blank stares, but I haven't driven that exact stretch of 29 in the middle of the night again. I time it differently now. I leave earlier or later, just in case. I work as a meteorologist at a small regional weather center. It's mostly the kind of job where you're looking at numbers and screens, waiting for storms or fronts to show up, and then tracking them as they move. Nothing fancy usually, just routine stuff. But a few months ago, something happened that I still can't explain. It started late one evening, just before my shift ended. I was watching the radar for any signs of storms moving through our area. Around that time, the radar screen showed this huge, slow-moving mass just south of the city. It was strange, because it wasn't like any weather pattern I'd ever seen before. It looked almost solid, like a big blob moving across the radar at low altitude. But the weird part was that it didn't match anything on the satellite images. I pulled up the satellite view expecting to see clouds or some kind of disturbance. Nothing, just clear skies. The radar kept showing this shape moving steadily across the region, but it wasn't changing shape like a cloud or storm would. It was more like a solid shadow or an object. I thought maybe the radar was malfunctioning, so I checked the system diagnostics. Everything looked normal, no errors or interference reports. I also called a colleague who was working a few towns over to see if their radar showed the same thing. He said, yeah, his radar picked up the same mass moving across his screen, same size and speed. That made it even weirder. Two separate radar stations showing the same thing, but nothing on satellite or any reports of anything unusual on the ground. I tried to see if there were any planes or helicopters in the area, thinking maybe some low-flying aircraft could cause the radar return. The flight tracker app showed no aircraft in that part of the sky at that time. The radar signature moved slowly, almost like something drifting, not flying fast like a plane. The speed was maybe 10 to 15 miles per hour, which would be slow for any aircraft. I kept watching it for the next half hour. It moved from south to north, cutting across several counties. No rain, no clouds, just this dark patch on radar. I started checking local reports, emergency channels, social media, anything that might explain it. No reports of any strange lights, objects, or phenomena. The local news stations weren't covering anything unusual. At one point, I went outside to look up at the sky. It was a clear night, stars visible, no moon. The air was cool and still, nothing to see, no lights, no sounds, just silence. I went back inside, stared at the radar. The shape kept moving, then eventually started fading away as it reached the northern edge of the radar's range. After the shift, I drove home along the same route the radar showed that shape traveling. I figured if there was something out there, maybe I'd catch a glimpse. But everything was normal. The roads were empty, the fields quiet, no lights in the sky, no unusual noises. That night, I kept thinking about the radar image. It didn't fit any explanation I could come up with. No storms, no aircraft, no natural weather patterns. The next day, I brought it up with my supervisor. He suggested maybe it was some kind of radar glitch or interference from a passing object like a satellite or space debris. I tried to check that. The satellite data didn't show any debris or anomalies in orbit at that time. And if it was interference, it was odd that two different radar stations showed the same thing at the same time. Over the next few days, I watched the radar carefully, hoping to see the same phenomenon again. Nothing. No more blobs, no strange masses. But a few weeks later, I noticed something else odd. The radar started showing brief, faint signals in the same general area around the same time of night. These signals weren't as clear or big as before, more like flickers or blips that lasted for just seconds. At first, I thought maybe some birds or insects were causing it, but the timing was strange. It always happened after midnight, moving slowly across the sky, always in roughly the same path as that big mass before. I asked around. Nobody else had noticed anything, or if they did, they weren't saying. One night, I stayed late after my shift to watch the radar. The flickers started again, small, quick flashes moving across the screen. I stepped outside to see if I could hear or see anything. The air was dead quiet, no wind, no distant traffic. I looked up but saw nothing but stars. Then I noticed a faint glow on the horizon, a dull, shifting light low to the north. It wasn't bright, more like a faint haze that appeared and disappeared. I tried to take a photo with my phone, but the camera couldn't pick up anything beyond the darkness. I stayed outside for maybe 20 minutes, watching the light fade away and the flickers disappear from the radar. Walking back to my car, I felt like I was being watched, but when I looked around, nothing was there. That feeling didn't go away easily. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me, but there was only the quiet night. After that, I didn't mention it at work. I didn't want anyone to think I was losing it or messing with the data. A few times since then, I've checked the radar at night and noticed those flickers again, the same slow, low signals moving in that same path. I still don't know what caused the big mass or the flickers. No one else I know has seen anything like it, and I've never found any reports or explanations. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just seeing glitches or misreading the instruments, but the data was there on the screens, consistent and real. Whatever it was, it passed through my area like a shadow, something moving close to the ground but invisible to any camera or eye. I'm not sure what to make of it. Just a strange pattern on the radar, a quiet night, and the feeling that something was there, just beyond sight. I woke up in the middle of the night to this low, humming noise. It wasn't loud or sharp, just this steady, deep vibration that seemed to fill the whole room. At first, I thought it was something outside, maybe the heater or a truck idling nearby, but nothing like that ever made a sound like this. It was different. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. The humming didn't change or stop. It was almost like a constant pulse, but slower than a heartbeat. I wasn't really sure how to describe it, kind of unsettling. Then I noticed this red light coming through the gap in my curtains. It wasn't bright like a streetlight or a car. It was more like a glow, pulsing softly. It changed in intensity every few seconds, like it was breathing or alive in some way. I sat up and stared at the window. Outside, the street was empty and quiet. No cars parked, no flashing lights from neighbors or anything normal like that. The red glow was coming from the woods behind the house, just beyond the edge of the yard. It wasn't from any street lamp or nearby building because those were farther down and had a yellowish light. I got out of bed and crept over to the window, pulling back the curtain a little more. The glow was bigger than before, still pulsing. It wasn't moving, just staying in the same spot, maybe 30 or 40 yards out. I pulled out my phone to record it. I figured maybe it was something strange, but explainable, like some kind of equipment or a weird reflection. When I unlocked it, the battery icon was flashing empty. Dead. That made no sense because I'd charged it all evening and barely used it before bed. I even tried plugging it into the charger, but nothing happened. The screen stayed black. I stood there for a minute, phone in hand, feeling weird. The humming got louder, or at least it felt louder in the silence of the night. It didn't sound mechanical, more like a deep tone, but not one I'd ever heard before. I wanted to tell my parents, but I didn't want to wake them up. They'd just tell me to go back to sleep. So I just watched the red light, hoping it'd go away or change. After maybe 10 minutes, the light started to fade, getting dimmer and slower, like it was going to disappear. The humming faded too, almost like it was leaving with the glow. I felt kind of stupid for staying up so late over some weird noise and light. I went back to bed and tried to fall asleep, but I kept hearing that low vibration in my ears. It wasn't really loud, but it was there, like a background noise I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I told my mom about it over breakfast. She said maybe it was a drone or some kind of power line issue. I thought about that, but the woods behind our house don't have power lines, and the glow didn't look like any drone lights I'd seen before. I went back outside to the spot where the light had been. Nothing was there. No marks on the grass, no strange smells, nothing unusual, just the normal trees and some rocks. I checked my phone again. It turned on fine and showed a full charge. I don't get it. A few nights later, the humming came back, but this time it was quieter and shorter, short like a distant vibration. No red light, just the sound fading into the night. Since then, I haven't heard the humming or seen anything strange. But sometimes, when it's quiet, I swear I feel like something's watching from the woods. I can't explain it, and I don't know if I'm imagining things or if something was really out there that night. Whatever it was, it didn't leave any answers. Just that strange glow, the hum, and my dead phone battery. I usually walk my dog Cleo right around sunrise. She's a black lab mix, big, lazy, gentle. We live in a quiet neighborhood outside a small town in Vermont. Not much goes on out here, just trees, hills, and the occasional passing truck. That morning was like any other. I got up at 5:30, made a cup of coffee, and clipped Cleo's leash to her collar. It was late spring, still a little cool before the sun came up, but the air smelled clean. Birds were already chirping like crazy. Loud enough that I noticed it before I even stepped outside. We always take the same route, down our long gravel driveway, across the road, and onto a narrow dirt trail that cuts through a stretch of woods. It's not part of any park, just a path worn down by hunters and people walking their dogs. It loops around and brings us back near the road after about half a mile. We were maybe 10 minutes in when I noticed something felt wrong. The trail dips down into this little hollow with tall pines on both sides, and it always gets a little darker and cooler there. But this time, it felt too quiet. That was the first thing, the silence. No birds, no wind, no bugs. It was like someone had hit mute on the world. The leaves weren't even rustling, and it wasn't just still. It was dead still. Cleo stopped walking. She didn't just pause to sniff something. She froze completely, like a statue. Tail down, ears pinned back. Then she looked up. I tried to tug her forward a little, but she wouldn't budge. She just stood there, staring straight above us into the sky like she was waiting for something to happen. I crouched next to her and rubbed behind her ear, but she didn't react. That's when I noticed she was trembling, full body shaking like she does during thunderstorms. I looked up too. There was nothing there, just a gray-blue sky, no clouds. I kept glancing around, thinking maybe it was a hawk or something, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement. And then I realized I could hear my own heartbeat. It was that quiet. I started to feel lightheaded, like when you stand up too fast. There was this pressure behind my eyes, like I'd gone up a mountain. I blinked a few times, trying to clear it, but it didn't go away. Then I saw it. Not directly above us. Off to the right, past the trees. Just barely visible between two branches. It looked like a disc or a dome. I couldn't tell how far it was or how big, but it wasn't moving. It was just there, hanging in the sky, completely still. The color was strange, kind of silvery, but dull, like brushed metal, not shiny. It didn't reflect light, and there was no glow or anything like that. Just this perfectly smooth shape floating in the sky, maybe 100 feet up. I didn't hear anything. Not a hum, not a buzz, nothing. Cleo wouldn't stop shaking. I picked her up. She's too big for that, but I did it anyway, and started walking back toward the road. I don't even remember making the decision. I just needed to not be there. As I walked, I glanced back once, and it was still there. Same position, same shape, just suspended in the sky like a balloon that had stopped midair. When I got closer to the road, I noticed the birds started up again, like flipping a switch. First one, then a few more, and then suddenly it was back to full volume. I put Cleo down, and she bolted the rest of the way to the house. I didn't even have to call her. Once we were inside, I locked the door behind me. I don't know why. It wasn't like I thought it was going to come through the door, but it felt necessary. Cleo went straight to the corner behind the couch and curled up there, still shaking. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and realized my hands were trembling too. I went outside later that afternoon just to see. I walked back to the trail with Cleo, but she wouldn't go past the edge of the woods. Not even a step. Her ears were down, and she kept looking up like she expected something to be there. I stood in the same spot where we'd stopped that morning, looking up through the trees. Nothing. Just open sky. The birds were chirping, wind blowing through the branches like normal. But something had changed. The air still felt a little off, like static. And I swear the pine needles on the ground looked disturbed, like they'd been pushed outward in a circle. Could have been anything, I guess. A deer, maybe. I didn't check too closely. I haven't seen it again. I've walked the trail since then, during the day, always with someone else. But Cleo still won't go near it. I've tried treats, toys, everything. She won't step past that first bend in the path. She plants her feet and stares up, every time. We were camping out by a lake in northern Wisconsin, not far from where my wife's family has some land. It's private property, no campsites or anything official, just a little clearing where her uncle had built a crude fire pit and left a couple of old folding chairs. No one else was around for miles. It was me, my wife, and our daughter, who was 7 at the time. We'd parked the car off the gravel trail and walked our gear in maybe a quarter mile through trees to the shoreline. The lake wasn't big, maybe 200 yards across, but deep, cold, and perfectly still most of the time. You could see tree reflections in it like a mirror. I'd never seen anyone else out there, not even boats. It doesn't connect to anything. We got there late afternoon, set up the tent, gathered firewood, the usual stuff. I grilled hot dogs over the fire while my daughter collected little pine cones. My wife read a book in one of the chairs. Real quiet out there, just birds and the occasional splash when something hit the water. Around dusk, I remember we were all just sitting, not really talking. There wasn't even any wind. Everything felt kind of hushed, like the woods were holding their breath. Then it got dark fast, like it does out there. We roasted marshmallows and got our daughter into her sleeping bag around 8:30. She fell asleep almost right away. My wife and I stayed up a while longer by the fire. We didn't have cell service, so we weren't distracted. Just stared at the flames, talked a little. The fire burned down to embers around 10, and we sat in the dark listening to the lake. It's one of those places where sound carries really far. You can hear a fish jump from across the water. Around 10:30 or so, I noticed this orange glow out over the lake. It wasn't bright, more like the dull orange of a sodium streetlight. But there were no lights out there, no cabins, no docks, no houses. We both looked at it, not saying anything at first. It was maybe 50 feet out, just hovering a few feet above the water, perfectly still. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but it wasn't moving. No blinking lights, no buzz or whine, no wind. Just that soft, steady glow. It looked like a sphere, maybe the size of a beach ball. The color reminded me of when the sun sets behind smoke, muted but solid. We stared at it for a good 30 seconds before my wife whispered, "What is that?" I didn't know what to say. It wasn't casting light onto the water, and the lake's surface stayed still. No ripples, no reflection. That's what really got me. You'd expect some kind of shimmer or disturbance, but there was nothing. Just this floating ball of orange light. I stood up slowly, not sure why. I didn't get closer, just rose out of instinct. As soon as I moved, the thing blinked out. Not like it flew off or faded, just gone. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. No sound, no splash, no movement. The water didn't react at all. We just looked at each other. My wife asked me again what I thought it was, and I said I didn't know. We stayed up another hour, half waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The next morning, I walked down to the shoreline and checked for anything unusual. There wasn't even a mark in the mud. The surface of the lake was smooth as glass. I tossed a small rock into the spot where we'd seen it, just to watch the ripples. They spread out exactly like you'd expect. But that thing hadn't made a single one. We didn't talk about it much that morning, just packed up like normal. Our daughter had slept through the whole thing. On the walk back to the car, I kept glancing over my shoulder like maybe I'd see it again through the trees. Nothing. That was last summer. We haven't gone back to that spot since. Not because of anything bad, just we haven't.